The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, which should have been Caleb's first warning. Nothing good ever came on Tuesdays. He found it wedged between the fence post and the mailbox, a bent, travel-worn thing with his sister's handwriting scrawled across the front. Margaret. Even her penmanship had that particular brand of bossy optimism that made his jaw clench. He'd moved 200 miles west specifically to get away from that optimism, but apparently distance meant nothing to a woman with a mission. Caleb didn't open it right away. He stood there in the late afternoon sun, September heat still clinging to the Wyoming air like a bad memory, and considered his options. He could burn it, feed it to the stove unopened, and pretend it never existed. But Margaret would just send another, and another. She was relentless that way, had been since they were kids. With a sigh that came from somewhere deep in his chest, the same place he kept everything else he didn't want to look at, he tore open the seal. Dearest Caleb, I know you'll be angry. You're always angry these days, so I've made my peace with that. But I'm your sister, and I love you too much to watch you die out there alone. Her name is Eliza Vance, 26 years old. From Boston originally, though she's been living in Denver the past year. A widow, like you, no children, no family left to speak of. She arrives on the 18th, 3 o'clock train. You don't have to love her, Caleb. You don't even have to like her. But you do have to be there, because I already sent her the money for the ticket and told her you were expecting her. I'm not apologizing for this. Someone has to save you from yourself. All my love, Margaret. Caleb read it twice, then a third time, because surely he'd misunderstood. But no, the words didn't change. His sister, in her infinite wisdom, had arranged a mail-order bride, without asking, without warning, without a single concern for what he might want. The paper crumpled in his fist. Around him, the ranch stretched out in every direction, 500 acres of scrub grass, rocky soil, and stubborn survival. He'd built this place from nothing. After the war, after Sarah and Samuel died from the fever, after everything good in his life had turned to ash, he'd come here to disappear. The land didn't judge, didn't expect conversation or emotion or any of the things that had become impossible for him. And now Margaret wanted to drop a woman into the middle of it. A stranger. Someone who'd expect what? A husband? A home? Things he couldn't give because he'd buried them 6 feet deep and had no intention of digging them up. The 18th was tomorrow. Caleb looked towards the western hills, where the sun was starting its descent, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. He'd have to ride into town, meet the train, tell this Eliza Vance that there'd been a terrible mistake, and she'd need to get right back on and head somewhere else. Anywhere else. It was the decent thing to do. He tried to feel bad about it, tried to summon some guilt for the woman who'd traveled all this way for nothing. But the truth was, he felt nothing. Just the same hollow emptiness that had been his companion for 3 years now. At least it was honest. Caleb rode into Sweetwater just after 2 o'clock the next day, giving himself an hour to fortify his resolve. The town wasn't much. A main street, a general store, a saloon, and a church that saw more use as a meeting hall than a house of worship. Maybe 300 people on a good day, scattered across the surrounding ranches and homesteads. He hitched his horse outside the saloon and went in. Whiskey, he told Frank, the bartender who'd seen him through more dark nights than either of them cared to count. Frank poured without comment. That was one of the things Caleb appreciated about him. The man understood the value of silence. Caleb drank, let the burn settle in his stomach, then pushed the glass forward for another. Expecting someone on the 3 o'clock? Frank asked, casual enough, but there was curiosity in his eyes. News traveled fast in small towns. Probably half of Sweetwater already knew about Margaret's meddling. No, Caleb said flatly. Frank's eyebrow raised a fraction, but he didn't push, just poured the second drink and moved down the bar to give another customer their change. Caleb nursed that second whiskey slower, watching the clock on the wall tick closer to 3. The saloon was quiet for a weekday afternoon. A couple of ranch hands playing cards in the corner, old Tom sleeping off his morning drunk at a table near the window. Normal, peaceful. The whistle split the air at 2:58, announcing the train's arrival. Caleb's hand tightened on his glass. He could stay here, just not show up. Let the woman figure it out herself. She was a widow, Margaret had said. She'd survived loss before. She could survive this too. But even as he thought it, he knew he wouldn't. Whatever else he'd become, he wasn't that kind of coward. The war had burned a lot of things out of him, but basic decency, or maybe just the ghost of it, still lingered. He finished the whiskey, dropped coins on the bar, and walked out into the sunlight. The train station was a simple platform with a small shelter, barely more than a roof on posts. A handful of people had gathered, Mrs. Chen picking up supplies, the Reverend waiting for his nephew, a few others Caleb recognized but didn't acknowledge. The train sat hissing and steaming like an exhausted beast. Passengers were already disembarking. A salesman with too many cases, a young family with wide-eyed children, an old man who looked like he'd been traveling for days. And then he saw her. She was the last one off, taking the conductor's hand for balance as she stepped down onto the platform. The first thing Caleb noticed was how small her bag was. Just one worn carpet bag that she carried herself, no porter, no trunks following behind. Everything she owned, right there in her hand. The second thing he noticed was her face. Not beautiful, exactly. Not in the way Sarah had been beautiful, all soft curves and easy smiles. This woman's face had edges to it, sharp cheekbones, a jaw that looked set against the world, eyes that had seen things and decided not to look away. Her dark hair was pulled back severe and practical, already escaping its pins from the journey. Dust covered her traveling dress, cheap fabric that had been mended more than once. She stood on the platform looking around, not lost exactly, but searching, looking for someone who was supposed to be there, looking for him. Caleb's feet stayed planted where they were. Around him, people moved and greeted and carried on with their lives, but he couldn't move. Couldn't quite bring himself to step forward and claim this stranger Margaret had sent. Their eyes met across the platform. Something flickered in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or resignation. She picked up her bag and walked toward him, each step deliberate and unhurried. Not eager, not hopeful, just doing what came next. She stopped 3 feet away. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her face, the way she held herself too straight, like if she relaxed even a fraction, she might collapse. Her dress was damp with sweat at the collar, her face flushed from heat and travel. "You're Caleb Rourke," she said. Not a question. "I am." "I'm Eliza Vance." They stood there in the dust and noise of the platform, two strangers tied together by someone else's decision, neither quite sure what to say next. "There's been a mistake," Caleb finally managed, the words he'd been rehearsing since yesterday. "My sister shouldn't have, I know," Eliza interrupted, and there was something almost gentle in her voice. "Your sister wrote me a very long letter about how you didn't know, didn't ask for this, would probably be angry." She shifted her bag to her other hand. "So if you want me to get back on that train, I understand, but it doesn't leave until Friday, so you've got 2 days to decide." Caleb blinked. He hadn't expected. "I have money for a room at the boarding house," she continued, practical and calm. "Mrs. Margaret sent extra. I won't be a burden on you while you make up your mind." "I don't need 2 days," Caleb said, finding his voice again. "I already know. Well, maybe you do." Eliza's eyes met his, and there was steel there beneath the exhaustion. "But I just spent 4 days on trains getting here, and I'd like a bath and a decent night's sleep before I turn around and go back to nothing. So you can make your speech on Friday if you want. But right now, I'm going to find that boarding house." She walked past him without waiting for a response. Caleb stood there, completely thrown. He'd expected tears, maybe, or anger, or desperate pleading. Something that would make it easier to say no and mean it. He hadn't expected this quiet, stubborn dignity. "Mrs. Beatty's place," he called after her. 2 blocks north, blue door." Eliza glanced back over her shoulder. "Thank you." And then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd with her single bag and her straight spine, leaving Caleb standing alone on the platform, wondering what the hell had just happened. Caleb didn't go to the boarding house that night, or the next day. He rode back to the ranch and tried to pretend everything was normal. He fed the horses, mended the fence on the north pasture that kept coming loose, checked the irrigation ditches. Regular work, the kind that filled hours and required nothing more than muscle and repetition. But his mind wouldn't settle. He kept seeing Eliza's face, that careful blankness that wasn't quite hiding something underneath, the way she'd held that bag like it contained her entire life, because it probably did. A widow, Margaret had written. No family left to speak of, just like him. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, Caleb tried to work out what bothered him most about the whole situation. Was it Margaret's interference, the assumption that he needed saving, or was it something else, something that felt uncomfortably like recognition? Because when Eliza had looked at him on that platform, she hadn't seen a potential husband. She'd seen what he was, a man going through the motions of living while everything inside him stayed dead. And she'd understood, because she was doing the same thing. Thursday morning, he rode into town. The boarding house was easy to find. Mrs. Beatty ran a tight operation, kept the place clean and respectable. Caleb had never been inside, but he knew its reputation. He knocked. Mrs. Beatty answered, a round woman in her 50s with flour on her apron and suspicion in her eyes. "Mr. Rourke." "Ma'am, I'm looking for Eliza Vance." "She's here." Mrs. Beatty didn't move from the doorway. "But I'll tell you right now, if you're planning to make a scene, you can turn around. That girl's been nothing but polite since she arrived, and I won't have her upset." "I'm not here to upset anyone," Caleb said, which wasn't entirely true, but close enough. Mrs. Beatty studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Parlor. I'll fetch her." The parlor was small and cluttered with doilies and photographs of people Caleb didn't know. He stood by the window, hat in his hands, trying to figure out what he was going to say. "There's been a mistake. Simple. Clean. Final." Footsteps on the stairs. Eliza entered wearing the same dress from yesterday. She probably didn't have another. Her hair was neater today, pulled back in a braid, and some of the exhaustion had eased from her face. She looked younger like this, though still not soft, still carrying herself like someone who'd learned not to expect comfort. "Mr. Rourke." "Miss Vance." He paused. "Or is it Mrs.? Either's fine. I'm not particular about it anymore." She sat in one of the chairs, hands folded in her lap, waiting. Caleb stayed standing. "I came to tell you that you should take the train tomorrow." "All right. I'm not looking for a wife. Wasn't when my sister wrote you, and I'm not now." "I understand. The ranch is no place for—" He stopped himself before he said something stupid like a woman or someone like you. "It's isolated, hard work. Not much comfort." "Most places are hard work and not much comfort," Eliza said quietly. "That's not news to me." Caleb shifted his weight, frustrated by her calmness. "You could go somewhere else. Denver, maybe. Find actual work. Make a real life." "There's nothing for me in Denver." "There's nothing for you here either." "Maybe not." Eliza's eyes met his, and for the first time he saw something flicker there. Not quite emotion, but an echo of it. "But at least here, I wouldn't be alone in the trying." The words hit harder than they should have, because he knew exactly what she meant. The kind of alone that had nothing to do with proximity to other people and everything to do with carrying weight no one else could see. "You don't know me," Caleb said, and it came out rougher than he intended. "You don't know what you'd be signing up for." "No," Eliza agreed. "But you don't know me either. And you're assuming I'd be a burden when I haven't asked you for anything except time to rest before getting back on a train." She stood then, smoothing her skirt in a gesture that seemed automatic. "I'll be at the station tomorrow at 3. If you're there, we can talk about what comes next. If you're not, I'll understand that too." "There's nothing to talk about." "Then you won't be there." Eliza moved toward the door, then paused. "Your sister told me about your wife. Your son. I'm sorry for your loss." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Don't—" "I won't mention it again," she said simply. "But I wanted you to know I'm not here because I don't understand grief. I'm here because I do." She left him standing in that cluttered parlor, hat crushed in his hands, everything inside him pulled tight and aching. Caleb spent Friday morning working himself into exhaustion. He mucked out the barn, replaced boards on the porch that didn't need replacing, hauled water until his shoulders burned. He wasn't going to the station. There was no point. Except at 2 o'clock, he found himself washing up, changing into a clean shirt, saddling his horse. Just to make sure she got off all right, he told himself. Basic decency, nothing more. The platform was less crowded this time. Friday afternoon, most folks were working. The train was already there, hissing and waiting, the conductor checking his pocket watch. Eliza stood near the passenger car, her bag at her feet. She'd found a different dress somewhere, still cheap, still worn, but clean. Her hair was pinned up beneath a practical bonnet. She saw him coming and something crossed her face. Not quite relief. Not quite surprise. Just acknowledgement. Caleb stopped a few feet away. "Came to see you off," he said, the lie tasting bitter. "That's kind of you." They stood in awkward silence. Around them the station carried on, cargo being loaded, passengers finding their seats, the everyday business of people going places. "Miss Vance," Caleb started, then stopped. Tried again. "Eliza." She waited. "If you stayed," he said slowly, working through each word like it might break him, "it wouldn't be as my wife. Not right away, I can't. I'm not ready for that." Eliza's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. Listening. "But you could work," Caleb continued. "The ranch needs help. Garden's gone to hell. Animals need tending, house needs, a lot of things. I'd pay fair wages. You'd have your own room, no expectations beyond the work."
"And later?" Eliza asked quietly. "I don't know about later. Can't promise anything about later." He met her eyes. "But you were right. About being alone in the trying. I'm tired of that too, even if I'm not ready to call it anything else." The conductor called for final boarding. Eliza looked at the train, then back at Caleb. "Your sister said you were stubborn. Margaret says a lot of things. She also said you were a good man, underneath all the rough edges."
"She's wrong about that," Caleb said flatly. "I'm not good anymore. Haven't been for a long time." "Neither am I." Eliza picked up her bag. "So maybe we'll understand each other after all." She walked past the train, past the conductor's confused look, and stopped beside Caleb's horse. "Well," she said, "are you going to help me up, or do I have to figure it out myself?" Caleb stared at her for a moment, this stranger who'd just upended everything with a few quiet words. Then he took her bag, secured it behind the saddle, and offered his hand. She took it. Her grip was stronger than he expected. He mounted behind her, and she settled against him without hesitation, practical and uncomplaining. The ride would be uncomfortable, 3 hours on horseback with 2 people, but she didn't mention it. As they rode out of Sweetwater, Caleb tried to identify what he was feeling. Not happiness. He wasn't sure he remembered what that felt like. Not even satisfaction, just possibility. The smallest, most dangerous thing. The ranch looked different with Eliza beside him. Caleb had stopped seeing it years ago. It had become just a collection of tasks, things to maintain and repair. But watching her take it in for the first time, he saw it fresh. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, a main room that served as kitchen and sitting area, a porch that wrapped around the front. Nothing fancy. The paint had peeled years ago, and he'd never bothered to fix it. Shutters hung crooked. The garden, Sarah's garden, had gone to weeds and wild grass. Behind the house, the barn stood solid enough. Corrals for the horses, a chicken coop that needed new wire. And beyond that, the land rolled out in every direction, brown and stubborn and endless. Eliza didn't say anything as Caleb helped her down. Just stood there in the late afternoon sun, dust settling around her skirts, taking inventory. "It needs work," Caleb said, and immediately felt stupid for stating the obvious. "Most things do." Eliza picked up her bag. "Which room is mine?" He led her inside, past the main room with its scarred table and cast-iron stove, down the short hallway to the spare bedroom. It had been Samuel's room once, before the fever. Caleb hadn't been inside in 3 years. The door stuck when he pushed it. Inside, everything was exactly as he'd left it. A small bed, a dresser, a trunk at the foot of the bed. Dust covered every surface thick as snow. "I'll clean it," Caleb said quickly. "Get some fresh sheets. Air it out."
"I can do it." Eliza set her bag on the bed, dust puffing up around it. "If you have a broom and some water." "In the kitchen." She nodded, already rolling up her sleeves. Caleb retreated to the main room, feeling awkward in his own house. He could hear her moving around, opening the window, sweeping, efficient sounds, purposeful. He started coffee because he didn't know what else to do. By the time it was ready, Eliza had emerged, face flushed from work. She'd cleaned the room, changed the sheets with linens she'd found in the trunk, opened the window to let in fresh air. Fast work. Thorough. "Coffee?" Caleb offered. "Please." They sat at the table with their cups, the silence stretching between them.
Not quite comfortable, but not hostile either. Just unfamiliar.
Rules, Caleb said finally, because structure felt safer than whatever else might fill the quiet. You work, I pay. $20 a month plus room and board. That's generous. It's fair. Garden, animals, house, all need attention. You keep things running. That's worth paying for. He paused. You'll eat with me. Meals are simple, but regular. All right. And your room is yours. I won't bother you there. Eliza's eyes met his over the rim of her cup. I know.
The way she said it, calm, certain, made Caleb wonder what she'd survived before coming here. What had taught her to read men so clearly? There's a town gathering next month, he continued. Harvest celebration. People will expect to meet you. There'll be questions. What do you want me to tell them? The truth. You're here to work, nothing else. And if they assume otherwise, let them. Caleb's voice went hard. Their assumptions aren't my problem. Eliza nodded slowly. One more thing. What? The graves behind the barn. Do you want me to avoid them? Caleb's chest went tight. Of course she'd seen them. Hard to miss. 2 simple wooden crosses marking the place where everything good had ended. No, he said after a moment. You can go where you want. Just don't expect me to talk about them. I won't. They finished their coffee in silence. That night, lying in his bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of someone else in the house, the creak of floorboards, water running, a door closing softly, Caleb stared at the ceiling and tried to convince himself he'd made the right choice. This wasn't charity. It was practical. He needed help. She needed work. Simple transaction. Nothing more complicated than that. But when he finally slept, he dreamed of Sarah for the first time in months. Not the Sarah from before, young and laughing and full of plans. This Sarah looked at him with sad, knowing eyes and whispered, "It's all right to try again." He woke before dawn, sweating and furious, and worked until exhaustion drowned everything else. Eliza didn't wait for instruction. That first morning, Caleb woke to find her already in the kitchen, coffee made, working through the previous night's dishes. She'd found Sarah's old apron in a drawer and wore it without comment. "Morning," she said, not turning from the wash basin. "Morning." Caleb poured coffee, feeling like a stranger in his own space. "You didn't have to." "I know, but I was awake." They ate breakfast in near silence, eggs and biscuits that Eliza had somehow conjured from his poorly stocked pantry. The biscuits were good. Too good. Sarah's recipe, probably pulled from the stained book that still sat on the shelf. After Caleb showed her around properly, the chickens first. They'd been half wild for months, but Eliza moved among them calm and unafraid, collecting eggs like she'd been doing it her whole life. "You've kept chickens before," Caleb observed. "My father had a farm, small one back east." Her voice was matter of fact. "Before he sold it and moved to the city, before everything fell apart." She didn't elaborate and Caleb didn't ask. The garden was worse than he'd remembered. What had once been neat rows of vegetables and herbs was now a tangle of weeds and dried stalks. Sarah's pride, reduced to nothing. Eliza walked through it slowly, touching plants, assessing soil. "It's not too late," she said finally. "We can clean it out, plant some cold weather crops, carrots, turnips, maybe some greens. Won't be much, but it'll be something." "We." The word hung in the air between them. "Do what you think best," Caleb said, then escaped to the barn before the weight of that we could settle too deep. The rhythm established itself quickly. Caleb worked the outer reaches of the ranch, mending fences, moving cattle, the hard physical labor that kept him gone most of the day. Eliza worked closer to the house, transforming the neglected spaces into something functional again. The garden came first. She spent 3 days clearing weeds, turning soil, making it ready. Caleb caught glimpses of her from a distance, bonnet shading her face, skirts tied up out of the way, working with steady determination. She never complained, never asked for help unless it was something she genuinely couldn't do alone. Just worked, methodical and thorough, until each task was complete. The chicken coop got new wire. The porch steps were reinforced. Windows that had been crusted with dirt for years suddenly let in clean light. Meals became regular. Eliza cooked simple food, nothing fancy but hot and filling. She'd found the root cellar, inventoried what was there, made lists of what they'd need from town. They ate together at the scarred kitchen table, conversations brief and practical. Need more flour. I'll add it to the list. North fence is down. I'll fix it tomorrow. All right. Not friendship, not even quite companionship. Just coexistence. But sometimes, in the evenings, Caleb would sit on the porch smoking his pipe, and Eliza would be there too, mending clothes or shelling peas, and the silence between them wasn't entirely uncomfortable. One night, about a week in, she spoke without looking up from her sewing. Tell me about the cattle. Caleb blinked. What about them? How many do you have? What breed? When do they calve? He answered, surprised by the questions. Most women he'd known, most people really, didn't care about ranch operations. But Eliza listened, asked follow-up questions, absorbed information like she was filing it away for future use. You planning to become a rancher? He asked, only half joking. No, but I'm living on one. Seems useful to understand how it works. Practical. Always practical. But sometimes he'd catch her looking out at the land with something in her expression that wasn't quite calculation. Something softer. Almost like she was trying to figure out if she could belong here. They went to Sweetwater together for the first time on Saturday, 2 weeks after Eliza's arrival. Caleb needed supplies, and Eliza's list had grown long enough to require the trip. The wagon ride was quiet. Eliza sat beside him, hands folded in her lap, watching the landscape roll past. She'd braided her hair more carefully today, wore her better dress, the one from the train station, cleaned and pressed. People will stare, Caleb warned as they approached town. I know. They'll make assumptions. Let them. Her calm acceptance made him feel worse somehow, like she'd already prepared herself for judgment and found it unremarkable. Sweetwater on a Saturday was busier than during the week. Families shopping, men gathering outside the saloon, children running loose between buildings. Caleb felt the attention shift to them immediately, subtle but unmistakable. He pulled the wagon up outside the general store. I'll handle the heavy supplies, he told Eliza. You get whatever else we need. She nodded and went inside. Caleb was loading sacks of grain when Frank appeared, casual but curious. So the rumors are true. She stayed. She's working for me, nothing else. Sure. Frank's tone said he didn't believe that for a second. She seems capable. She is. Margaret must be pleased. Caleb's hands tightened on the grain sack. Margaret's 3 states away, being pleased at her own kitchen table. Frank chuckled. Fair enough. But Caleb, people are going to talk. Woman living at your ranch, no wedding, no chaperone. Let them talk. I'm just saying, might be simpler to... No. The word came out harder than Caleb intended. It's not like that. Won't be like that. She's an employee, that's all. Frank held up his hands. All right, your business. But as he walked away, Caleb knew the conversation would be repeated. Embellished. By Monday, half the county would have opinions about his living arrangements. Inside the store, Eliza was at the counter with Mrs. Chen, the owner. The older woman was eyeing Eliza with open curiosity, but Eliza's expression remained pleasantly neutral. And 3 pounds of sugar, she was saying, checking her list. Oh, and do you have any garden seeds, late-season crops? Some. Mrs. Chen pulled out a box. Turnips, carrots, winter lettuce. Not much call for them this time of year. I'll take what you have. Mrs. Chen rang up the purchases, then looked between Eliza and Caleb. So you're staying out at the Rourke place? I am. Must be quite a change from Boston. Eliza's smile didn't waver. Every place is different from every other place, Mrs. Chen. I'm finding Wyoming educational. It was perfectly polite and completely deflected the real question. Mrs. Chen looked momentarily thrown, then recovered. Well, welcome to Sweetwater. Thank you. They loaded the wagon and left without further incident, but Caleb could feel eyes on them the whole way out of town. On the ride back, Eliza finally spoke. I made things difficult for you. You didn't do anything. I exist. Apparently that's enough. She looked down at her hands. I could find somewhere else. There's probably work in town. No. The word came out sharp enough that she looked at him. This is my ranch, Caleb said. You work for me. Anyone who's got a problem with that can take it up with me directly. You don't owe anyone explanations. Eliza studied his face for a long moment. All right. They rode in silence after that, but something had shifted. Some invisible line had been drawn, and Caleb had, maybe for the first time since she'd arrived, chosen her side of it. Caleb found Eliza at the graves on a Sunday evening. He'd been in the barn, finishing up late, when he noticed her walking toward the small fenced area behind it. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and amber, and she moved slowly, like she wasn't entirely sure she should be there. He watched from the barn door as she stood before the two crosses. Didn't kneel, didn't touch them. Just stood, hands clasped in front of her, head slightly bowed. Something about the sight made Caleb's chest hurt. He should leave. Give her privacy. Give himself distance from the painful memories those graves represented. But his feet carried him forward anyway. Eliza heard him coming. She must have, but didn't turn. "Sarah," Caleb said quietly, standing beside her. "And Samuel, my wife and son." How old was he? 4, almost 5. The silence stretched, not awkward, just heavy with things unsaid. "Fever came through 3 years ago," Caleb continued, the words coming easier than they should have. "Hit the whole county. Some folks survived it. They didn't. I'm sorry. You said that already." "I know." Eliza's voice was soft. "But I mean it." Caleb looked at the graves, at the simple crosses he'd carved himself because paying someone else felt wrong. Sarah had been 32. Samuel not even old enough to understand what was happening to him. "What about you?" he asked. "You said you were a widow." "Thomas." Eliza's hands tightened against each other. "We were married 2 years. He was a clerk, good with numbers. We had plans, save money, buy a little house, start a family." "What happened?" "Factory fire. He was working a second job to save faster. Doors were locked from the outside. Owner didn't want workers leaving early." Her voice stayed steady, but something in it was utterly cold. 43 people died. Thomas was one of them. Caleb felt something twist in his gut. Jesus. They paid us $50, compensation, they called it. That's what 2 years of marriage was worth, apparently. $50 and a closed case. "Your family?" "Parents dead. No siblings." Thomas's family blamed me, said if I'd been content with less, he wouldn't have needed that second job. She let out a breath. "So I left Boston, went to Denver, found work where I could, tried to figure out what comes after everything ends." "And did you? Figure it out?" "No." She finally looked at him, and there was something raw in her expression. "But then your sister's letter came, and I thought, maybe not knowing is easier somewhere new." They stood together as the sun finished setting, two people bound by loss they'd never asked for, building something neither of them quite understood yet. "Thank you," Eliza said finally, "for telling me about them." Caleb nodded, not trusting his voice. As they walked back to the house together, the first stars appearing overhead, he realized something had changed. They weren't quite strangers anymore. They were survivors, recognizing each other in the dark. The days grew shorter. October arrived with crisp mornings and the smell of coming winter. Eliza's garden produced its first harvest, modest but real. Carrots and turnips, winter lettuce, some herbs she'd coaxed back to life. She preserved what they couldn't eat immediately, filling jars with pickled vegetables, organizing the root cellar with systematic precision. The house transformed around them. Slowly, without fanfare, it became a place that felt lived in again. Curtains appeared in windows. The stove was kept clean. Small repairs happened without Caleb asking. A loose door handle tightened, a squeaky floorboard fixed. Eliza never touched Sarah's things, though. The photographs on the mantel stayed exactly where they were. The books on the shelf remained undisturbed. She moved around the ghosts in the house with respect, claiming space without erasing what had come before. Caleb noticed but didn't comment. They fell into patterns. Morning coffee together, brief conversations over breakfast, then separating for the day's work. Evenings on the porch, comfortable silence broken only by occasional practical discussion. Sometimes, though, the conversation strayed beyond the immediate. "Why Wyoming?" Eliza asked one evening, hands busy with mending. "Wanted to disappear," Caleb answered honestly. "After the war, after Sarah and Samuel, I needed somewhere no one knew me. somewhere I could just exist without expectations. Did it work? For a while. He studied his pipe, choosing words carefully. Then Margaret decided existing wasn't enough. Is she always like that? Managing your life from a distance? Only since I stopped managing it myself. He glanced at Eliza. She means well. Doesn't make it less irritating, but she means well. Eliza smiled, a rare thing, but real. My mother was like that, always convinced she knew what was best, even when she clearly didn't. You miss her? Yes and no. She knotted a thread, cut it neatly. I miss the idea of having family. The reality was more complicated. Caleb understood that. The war had taught him that family could be the people who shared your blood or the ones who stood beside you in the mud and terror. Sometimes they were the same. Often they weren't. As the month progressed, small changes continued. Eliza started keeping wildflowers in a jar on the table. Nothing fancy, just what grew naturally nearby. The house began to smell like bread baking, herb bundles drying, coffee and wood smoke. The land responded to care too. The garden, even in its limited late-season growth, showed what was possible. The chickens produced reliably. The barn was organized and functional. Caleb caught himself thinking ahead sometimes, planning for spring, considering which fields to plant, how to expand the herd. Future thoughts. Dangerous thoughts. But they kept coming anyway. Mkak. The harvest celebration arrived on the last Saturday of October, and with it came the reckoning Caleb had been dreading. He'd considered not going, making excuses, letting Eliza attend alone if she wanted. But that felt cowardly, and whatever else he'd become, he still had enough pride left to face down small-town gossip. They took the wagon in together, Eliza wearing her good dress again, hair pinned up carefully. She'd been quiet all morning, and Caleb wondered if she was nervous. Hard to tell with her, she kept so much locked down behind that calm exterior. "You don't have to do this," he said as Sweetwater came into view. "I can tell people you're sick, not feeling up to it. I'm fine." "Eliza, I've survived worse than judgmental looks and whispered conversations, Caleb. I'll manage." She smoothed her skirt, a gesture he'd come to recognize as her way of steadying herself. Besides, hiding only makes people more curious. She was right, but that didn't make it easier. The celebration was held in the open space behind the church, tables set up with food, children running wild, men clustered in groups talking weather and cattle prices. Someone had strung up lanterns for when evening came, and a makeshift stage stood ready for the dancing that would happen later. Heads turned when they arrived. Not all at once. Not obviously. But Caleb felt the shift in attention, the way conversations paused just slightly, eyes tracking their movement. "Mr. Rourke," Reverend Matthews approached with his usual enthusiasm. He was a good man, the Reverend, genuinely kind in a way that didn't feel performative. "Good to see you, and this must be Miss Vance." "Mrs. Vance," Eliza corrected gently. "Pleased to meet you, Reverend." "The pleasure's mine. Margaret wrote to me, told me to keep an eye on things." His eyes twinkled, "Though I suspect you're both managing just fine without my supervision." "We're getting by," Caleb said. "More than that from what I hear. Mrs. Chen says you've brought quite a list to town the past few weeks. Sounds like the ranch is thriving again." Before Caleb could respond, a woman's voice cut through the pleasantries. "Well, isn't this cozy? Martha Hendricks, of course." The woman ran the local boarding house, not Mrs. Beatty's respectable establishment, but the other one, and considered herself the town's moral authority. She stood with two other women, arms crossed, disapproval radiating like heat. "Mrs. Hendricks," Caleb said flatly. "Mr. Rourke, I'm surprised to see you here, bringing your employee." The pause before employee was deliberate, loaded with insinuation. Eliza's expression didn't change, but Caleb felt her go still beside him. "Miss Vance is my guest," he said, voice hard. "Same as anyone else here." "Oh, I'm sure she is." Martha's smile was all teeth. "It's just unusual, isn't it? A woman living alone with a man, no family, no proper oversight. People talk, Then people should find better hobbies." "Caleb," Reverend Matthews interjected gently, "why don't you introduce Mrs. Vance around? I'm sure folks would love to meet her properly." It was a diplomatic escape, and Caleb took it. He guided Eliza away from Martha's poisonous smile, Tension coiled tight in his shoulders. "I'm sorry," he muttered once they were out of earshot. "Don't be. I told you I expected it." "That doesn't make it right." Eliza glanced at him, something unreadable in her expression. "No, but it's not your fault either." They made their way through the gathering, and the reception was mixed. Some people were genuinely welcoming: Frank and his wife, the young couple who ran the newspaper, a few of the ranchers Caleb knew from cattle sales. Others were cool but polite, maintaining social niceties while clearly reserving judgment. And then there were the ones like Martha, whose disapproval sat thick and obvious. Eliza handled it all with the same calm dignity she brought to everything else, answering questions, deflecting nosiness, maintaining pleasant conversation without revealing anything real. It was impressive, in a way, like watching someone navigate a minefield with a map only they could see. They were standing by the food tables when a young woman approached. Couldn't have been more than 19, pretty, in a fresh-faced way that made Caleb feel ancient. "Mrs. Vance, I'm Annie Porter. I just wanted to say, well, I think it's wonderful what you're doing." Eliza blinked. "What I'm doing?" "Working for yourself, making your own way. My mother says it's scandalous, but I think it's brave." Annie's enthusiasm was genuine, her smile wide. "I'd love to do something like that, but Mother would never allow it. She says a woman's place is, well, you know." "I do know," Eliza said quietly. "And thank you, Annie. That's very kind." After Annie left, Caleb noticed something had shifted in Eliza's posture. Not much, but enough. "What is it?" "Nothing. Just, I didn't expect anyone to see it that way." "See what?" "This, me, as anything other than a scandal or a mistake." She looked out at the gathering, at all these people living their ordinary lives. She called it brave. "No one's called me brave before." "You're brave," Caleb said before he could think better of it. "Coming here, staying, dealing with all this judgment, that takes courage." Eliza's eyes met his, and for a moment something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Or just shared understanding of what it meant to keep moving forward when everything else said to quit. The moment broke when someone called for the dancing to start. Caleb watched couples form up on the makeshift floor, fiddle music starting up bright and quick. He didn't dance. Hadn't since Sarah died. The thought of it felt wrong, like betraying something he wasn't ready to let go of. But then he saw Martha Hendricks watching them, satisfaction in her smile, like she'd won something, like she'd proven whatever point she'd been trying to make about impropriety and scandal. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Dance with me," he said to Eliza. She looked startled. "What?" "Dance with me, unless you don't want to." She glanced at the couples, then back at him. "Are you sure?" No, he wasn't sure about anything, but he was tired of letting other people's judgments dictate his choices. "I'm sure." He led her to the floor, aware of eyes on them, whispers starting up. The fiddler struck up a waltz slower than the previous songs, and Caleb took Eliza's hand. She was stiff at first, uncertain. He was rusty, movements awkward after years of disuse. But they found a rhythm eventually, swaying together in time with the music. "I haven't danced since my wedding," Eliza admitted quietly. "I haven't danced since my wife's funeral. Someone thought it would be therapeutic." "Was it?" "No, it was terrible." He managed something that might have been a smile. "This is better." Setting a low bar there. "I excel at low bars." She laughed, actually laughed, soft and surprised. The sound did something strange to Caleb's chest. They danced through one song, then another. Other couples filled the floor, and gradually the attention shifted away from them. By the third dance, they were just two more people moving to the music, unremarkable in the growing crowd. "Thank you," Eliza said when the music finally paused. "For this." "For what?" "Choosing to dance with me instead of letting them win." Caleb looked down at her, at this woman who'd somehow become more than an employee in the past month, though he couldn't quite name what she was instead. "They don't get to win," he said simply. "Not about this." The evening wore on. They ate food from the communal tables, listened to Reverend Matthews give a brief speech about gratitude and community, watched children play games in the lantern light. Normal things. The kind of ordinary moments Caleb had forgotten existed. On the wagon ride home, both of them tired, Eliza spoke into the darkness. "Your sister was right."
About what? You needed this. Not the judgment or the gossip, but the reminder that life happens outside that ranch, that there's more than just work and silence. Caleb didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about the dance, about Eliza's laugh, about the way it had felt almost normal to be part of something again. Maybe, he admitted finally, but I still don't like her meddling. Of course not. That would require admitting she was right, and I suspect you'd rather eat glass. He huffed, almost a laugh. You're learning. I'm a quick study. The ranch appeared ahead, dark against the stars. Home. When had it started feeling like home again instead of just a place he existed? November arrived with the first real cold snap, frost coating everything in the mornings, breath visible in the air. Winter was coming, and they both felt the urgency of it, preparations that couldn't wait. Caleb spent long days reinforcing the barn, making sure the animals would have adequate shelter. The cattle needed to be moved to the winter pasture, closer to the hay stores. Fences required checking, weak points shored up before snow made the work impossible. Eliza threw herself into winterizing the house. She sealed gaps around windows with strips of cloth and old newspaper, checked the chimney for blockages, organized the root cellar with military precision. The preserves she'd made were lined up neatly, pickled vegetables, dried herbs, anything that would help them through the lean months. They worked in parallel, separate but coordinated, like two parts of the same machine. One evening, Caleb came in from the barn to find Eliza standing in what had been Samuel's room, her room now. The door was open and she was looking at something in her hands. He should have kept walking, given her privacy, but something about her posture stopped him. You all right? She startled slightly, then turned. In her hands was a small photograph in a tarnished frame. I found it in the trunk, she said, under the extra blankets. I wasn't snooping, I was just... It's fine, what is it? Eliza held it out. The photograph showed a young couple, stiff and formal in the way of old pictures. The woman was barely more than a girl, pretty, but serious. The man beside her had Caleb's eyes. Your parents? Yeah. Taken before the war. Before everything went to hell. Caleb took the frame, studying faces he hadn't seen in years. My father died at Shiloh. Mother followed a year later. Just gave up. Margaret and I were left to figure things out alone. How old were you? 17. Margaret was 15. He traced the edge of the frame. I joined up after that. Seemed like a better option than watching her try to manage a farm she was too young to run. Did she manage it? Sold it. Moved to Ohio with our aunt. Married a banker, had 3 kids, built a nice, safe life. There was no judgment in his voice, just statement of fact. She tried to get me to join her after the war. I couldn't. Too much noise, too many people, too many expectations. Eliza took the photograph back carefully. Do you mind if I keep this out on the dresser? It's your room. Do what you want with it. That's not what I asked. Caleb met her eyes. She was asking permission, he realized. Not just for the photograph, but for something larger. Permission to exist fully in this space, to make it hers without erasing what it had been. I don't mind, he said. Might be good for someone to look at them again. That night, passing by her room on the way to his own, Caleb saw the photograph on the dresser. Next to it, Eliza had placed a small wooden box he recognized. It had belonged to Sarah, held her few pieces of jewelry. He'd forgotten it was in that trunk. She hadn't opened it, just placed it there, like an acknowledgement. A way of saying the past and present could occupy the same space without one destroying the other. The next morning, Caleb found himself telling Eliza about the war over breakfast. Not the sanitized version people wanted to hear, but the real thing. The mud and blood and terror, the way men died over inches of ground that didn't matter, the friends he'd watched fall and couldn't save. I came back wrong, he said finally. Sarah tried. She really tried to help me find my way back to who I'd been, but that person was gone. And then she got sick, and Samuel, he couldn't finish, didn't need to. Eliza was quiet for a long moment. Then, Thomas used to have nightmares. After the fire, they pulled him out alive, but he'd breathed in too much smoke, seen too much. He'd wake up choking, convinced he was still trapped. How long did he survive after? 6 months. His lungs were damaged. The doctor said it was pneumonia that finally took him, but I think he'd been dying since the fire.
Just took time for his body to catch up with what his spirit already knew. They sat with that shared understanding, two people who'd watched the ones they loved slip away despite everything.
I should have been there, Eliza continued, the day of the fire. But I had a headache, stayed home from the market. If I'd convinced him not to work that second job, Don't, Caleb said sharply. That path only leads to madness. Trust me, I've walked it enough to know. Do you still walk it? Sometimes, less than I used to. He looked at her. Turns out having someone else around makes it harder to get completely lost in your own head. Is that what I am? A distraction? He struggled for the right word. Company. The kind that doesn't require me to pretend everything's fine, but won't let me disappear completely either. Eliza's expression softened. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in a long time. That's depressing. Maybe, but it's true. The conversation shifted to easier topics after that. Supply lists, weather predictions, whether they had enough firewood stockpiled. But something had changed. Some barrier had thinned. They were still careful with each other, still maintaining their separate spaces. But the distance felt less necessary now, less like protection and more like habit. Winter's first real storm hit in mid-November, 3 days of snow that buried the ranch under 2 feet of white. They were trapped inside together, the world shrunk down to the house and the desperate dashes to the barn to care for the animals. Caleb had weathered storms alone before, had actually preferred it. No need to make conversation, no obligation to be anything other than functional. But having Eliza there changed the experience entirely. She cooked elaborate meals because there was time and nothing else to do. Read aloud from books she found on the shelf while he repaired tack and tools. Taught him a card game her father had favored, laughing when he lost spectacularly. You're terrible at this, she said, collecting her winnings. Dried beans they were using as currency. I'm terrible at most things that don't involve manual labor. That's not true. You're good at sulking. World class, really. Caleb looked up, startled. Eliza's eyes were dancing with amusement, her mouth curved in a smile that transformed her entire face. I don't sulk? You absolutely sulk. Brooding, specifically. Very dramatic. I'm not dramatic. Caleb, you live alone on a ranch in the middle of nowhere, communing with your trauma and avoiding human connection. That's the definition of dramatic. He wanted to argue, but the accuracy was too sharp. Instead, he found himself laughing, actually laughing, the sound rusty and strange to his own ears. When did you get so mouthy? I've always been mouthy. You were just too busy brooding to notice. They played cards until the lamp oil ran low, keeping score with increasingly ridiculous stakes. By the end, Eliza had won the rights to name any future children, all theoretical, she'd specified, and Caleb had secured control of the chicken coop for eternity. It was stupid, meaningless, the kind of thing people did when they were comfortable with each other, when they were becoming friends. That night, lying in his bed listening to the storm rage outside, Caleb realized he was happy. Not ecstatic, not overcome with joy, just content. A quiet happiness he'd forgotten existed. It terrified him, because happiness was dangerous. Happiness meant attachment, and attachment meant risk. It meant opening himself up to the possibility of loss all over again, and he wasn't sure he could survive that a second time. But when morning came and he found Eliza already in the kitchen, humming quietly while she made coffee, the fear seemed smaller, more manageable. Maybe that's what healing was. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep going despite it. The storm passed, leaving the world crystalline and beautiful. They dug out together, clearing paths to the barn, checking on the animals, assessing damage. The work was hard but satisfying, and they moved together with practiced efficiency. We make a good team, Eliza observed, leaning on her shovel. We do. Think we'll survive the winter? Caleb looked at the ranch, their ranch, really, since she'd poured just as much into it as he had. Yeah, I think we will. December brought more snow and shorter days. The world outside became a monochrome study in white and gray, beautiful in its starkness. Inside, the house stayed warm, the stove burning constantly, the smell of wood smoke and cooking food becoming as familiar as breathing. They developed routines within routines. Morning coffee before dawn, working through the day's necessities. Evenings by the fire where Eliza would sew or read, and Caleb would whittle or simply stare into the flames. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't.
Both were comfortable. One night, Eliza looked up from her book. "Tell me something you've never told anyone." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "That's a hell of a question." "I know, you don't have to answer." But he found he wanted to give her something real, something that mattered. "I was glad when Sarah died." Eliza went very still. "Not glad she was gone," Caleb continued quickly, "but glad she wasn't suffering anymore. The fever, it was brutal. She was in so much pain and there was nothing I could do. When she finally went, there was relief, and I've hated myself for that ever since." "Why?" "Because what kind of husband feels relief when his wife dies? The kind who loved her enough to want her suffering to end." Eliza set down her book. "Grief isn't simple, Caleb. It's not one pure emotion. It's a dozen contradictory feelings all happening at once, and feeling relief doesn't mean you didn't love her." "How do you know?" "Because I felt the same way when Thomas died. He was drowning slowly, suffocating in his own body. And when it finally ended, I thought, thank God. Then spent months hating myself for it." They looked at each other across the firelight, two people who'd been carrying similar weights without knowing it. "You never talk about the good parts," Eliza said. "About Sarah, I mean. It's always the loss, the grief. But there must have been happy times too." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. The memories were there, locked away carefully. He'd been so afraid of them, afraid that looking at the happy times would make the loss hurt worse. But maybe it was time. "She laughed at everything," he said finally. "Terrible jokes, her own mistakes, the chickens when they'd do something stupid. The house was always full of her laughing." He smiled despite himself. "And she sang, constantly, terribly off-key, didn't care at all. Used to wake me up singing while she made breakfast." "She sounds wonderful." "She was. We met at a church social. I know, boring. But she'd brought this terrible pie, and she was so embarrassed about it. And I ate 3 pieces just to make her feel better. Got sick as hell later. Totally worth it." Eliza smiled. "And Samuel?"
Looked just like her. Same eyes, same smile. He was obsessed with horses. Wanted to be a rancher like his old man. We'd just gotten him his first pony when... Caleb's throat tightened. He was so excited. Named it Thunder, even though the thing was gentle as a lamb. "What happened to the pony?" "Sold it. Couldn't stand to look at it." They sat with that for a while. Then Eliza spoke again, softer. "Tell me about the good parts of Thomas." So she did. Talked about how he'd bring her flowers from the street vendor, how he'd read the newspaper aloud over breakfast, doing silly voices for different columnists, how he'd had this dream of opening his own accounting office someday. They traded stories like that deep into the night, excavating the good memories from beneath the grief. It hurt, but it was a clean hurt. The kind that meant healing instead of festering. When they finally went to their separate rooms, Caleb felt lighter. Like he'd set down weight he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it was there. Christmas approached, though neither of them mentioned it. The holiday felt too loaded, too full of expectations and memories. But on Christmas Eve, Caleb came in from the barn to find the house transformed. Eliza had cut pine branches and draped them along the mantel, the sharp, clean smell filling the air. Candles were lit, more than they usually allowed, casting warm light everywhere. "What's all this?" "It's Christmas Eve." Eliza looked almost embarrassed. "I know we haven't talked about it, but I thought, it doesn't have to be a big thing, just an acknowledgement." On the table sat 2 packages wrapped in brown paper. Simple, unassuming. "Eliza, they're small. Don't get excited." Caleb had nothing for her, hadn't even thought about gifts. But she waved away his apology. "Just open them." The first package contained a new pair of work gloves, sturdy leather, clearly handmade. The stitching was precise and even. "Your old ones were falling apart," Eliza said. The second was a small carved wooden box. Inside, 3 cigars. "Frank mentioned you used to smoke them before. I thought maybe..." Caleb stared at the gifts, throat tight. They were perfect. Practical but thoughtful, chosen by someone who'd been paying attention. "Thank you," he managed. "You're welcome." He disappeared into his room and came back with something wrapped hastily in newspaper. "It's not much. I didn't know we were... I should have thought..." "Caleb, it's fine." She opened it carefully. Inside was a small leather-bound journal, blank pages waiting to be filled. He'd bought it months ago on a supply run, thinking vaguely that she might want it, then forgotten about it until tonight. "I noticed you writing sometimes," he said, "on scraps of paper. Thought you might want something proper." Eliza ran her hand over the cover, eyes bright. "It's perfect." They had dinner by candlelight, nothing fancy, just stew and bread. But it felt special anyway. Felt like the kind of holiday memory worth keeping. After, they sat by the fire, and Caleb found himself telling her about Christmases past. His childhood ones with Margaret, the lean years after the war, the one perfect Christmas with Sarah and Samuel. Eliza shared hers too. Boston Christmases with her parents, the fancy ones with Thomas's family where she'd felt out of place, the lonely one last year in Denver where she'd worked through the day to avoid thinking about everything she'd lost. "This is better," she said finally. "Quieter, but better." "Yeah," Caleb agreed. "It is." As the fire burned down and the candles guttered, Caleb realized something had shifted again. They'd crossed another invisible line, moved into territory he hadn't anticipated. Eliza wasn't just his employee anymore, wasn't just company or a distraction. She was becoming something more integrated, more essential, part of the fabric of his daily life in a way he couldn't easily unpick. It should have scared him more than it did. But mostly, sitting there in the warm house with snow falling outside and Eliza humming quietly beside him, Caleb just felt grateful. Grateful that Margaret had meddled. Grateful that Eliza had stayed. Grateful for this unexpected second chance at something that might, eventually, feel like living again. The new year arrived without fanfare, just another day of bitter cold and endless white. January in Wyoming was unforgiving, the kind of weather that tested everything: structures, animals, and the people trying to survive it all. The snow that had seemed almost beautiful in December became oppressive, relentless waves that buried fences and made every task twice as hard. Caleb woke one morning to find ice crystals coating the inside of the windows, delicate ferns of frost that would have been pretty if they didn't mean the temperature had dropped dangerously low overnight. He could see his breath in the bedroom, and when he put his feet on the floor, the cold shot through him like a physical blow. In the kitchen, Eliza was already stoking the stove, wrapped in 2 shawls and a blanket besides. Her nose was red, fingers clumsy with cold as she fed wood into the firebox. "Thermometer says 15 below," she said without preamble. "And that's not counting the wind." Caleb swore under his breath. "The animals. I know. We need to check them." They bundled up in every piece of clothing they owned, wrapped scarves around their faces until only their eyes showed, and pushed out into the cold. The wind hit like a fist, stealing breath, burning exposed skin. Snow whipped horizontal across the yard, turning the familiar landscape alien and hostile. The barn was marginally warmer, the animals' body heat taking the edge off. But marginally wasn't enough. The cattle huddled together, frost coating their hides. The horses stamped and shifted, anxious. Even the chickens were subdued, puffed up and clustered for warmth. "We need more hay," Caleb shouted over the wind, howling through gaps in the walls. "Keep them insulated." They worked together hauling bales, spreading fresh bedding, checking water troughs that had frozen solid overnight. It took hours, brutal physical labor in conditions that made every movement painful. By the time they finished, Caleb's hands were numb even inside his gloves, and Eliza was shaking with cold. Back inside, they stood by the stove trying to thaw out. Eliza's teeth were chattering, her lips almost blue. "Hot water," Caleb said, already moving. "You need to warm up gradually or you'll hurt yourself." He heated water on the stove, poured it into the wash basin, and made Eliza put her hands in. She hissed at the contact, tears springing to her eyes as circulation returned. "Burns," she said through gritted teeth. "I know, but it's necessary." He did the same with his own hands, the pain sharp and immediate. They stood there together, hands submerged, waiting for the worst to pass. "This is only January," Eliza said quietly. "We've got 2 more months of this. Maybe 3. Cheerful thought. But there was no real fear in her voice, just acknowledgement of what lay ahead. She'd proven herself tougher than Caleb had initially given her credit for, tougher than most people, really. She didn't complain, didn't shy from hard work, just kept pushing forward with that same steady determination. The cold snap lasted 5 days. 5 days of brutal, relentless cold that made every task a trial. They fell into a routine born of necessity, up before dawn, checking animals, hauling water from the well before it could freeze, keeping the fires burning,
rationing food and fuel because supplies were finite, and the nearest town might as well have been on the moon. They talked less during those days, conserved energy for the physical demands. But the silence between them was comfortable, familiar. They'd learned to read each other without words. A glance, a gesture, a nod was often enough. On the 6th day, the temperature climbed back above zero, and it felt like a gift. The wind died down, the sun emerged pale and distant, and the world became almost manageable again. "We made it," Eliza said that evening, sitting close to the stove with a cup of coffee warming her hands. "This time, you're such an optimist." "I'm a realist. Another storm's coming. Maybe tonight, maybe next week, but it's coming." Eliza was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you ever think about leaving? Going somewhere warmer, easier?" "Sometimes, especially in January." Caleb looked out the window at the frozen landscape. "But then what? Start over somewhere else, doing something else? At least here I know what I'm fighting." "Is that what this is? A fight?" "Everything's a fight. The land, the weather, the memories. You fight or you surrender, and I'm not ready to surrender." "Even when it's 15 below and you can't feel your fingers?" "Especially then. That's when it matters most." Eliza smiled slightly. "You're stubborn." "So are you." "I know. That's how I know it when I see it." The next storm did come, 3 days later. Not as brutal as the cold snap, but heavy snow that fell for 36 hours straight. They were trapped inside again, the world shrunk down to the house and the short, desperate trips to the barn. During one of those trips, Caleb slipped on ice hidden beneath fresh snow. His feet went out from under him, and he went down hard. The wind knocked from his lungs, pain shooting through his ribs. "Caleb!" Eliza was beside him instantly, hands on his shoulders. "Are you hurt?" He tried to breathe, couldn't quite manage it. The pain was sharp and immediate, worse than it should have been from a simple fall. "Ribs," he managed finally. "Maybe cracked." Getting him inside was an ordeal. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through his chest, and by the time they made it to the house, Caleb was sweating despite the cold, nauseated from the hurt. Eliza helped him onto his bed, then disappeared. She returned with strips of cloth and something that looked like an old corset. "What?" "We need to wrap your ribs, keep them stable." She helped him sit up, careful but firm. "This is going to hurt." It did. Every breath was agony as she wrapped the cloth tight around his chest, binding the injured ribs. Caleb gritted his teeth, refusing to make a sound, but his hands gripped the bed frame hard enough to turn his knuckles white. "Done," Eliza said finally. "You need to rest. No heavy lifting, no sudden movements." "The animals." "I'll handle the animals." "Eliza, you can't do it all yourself. Watch me." There was steel in her voice, the same iron core he'd glimpsed that first day on the platform. She meant it. For the next week, Eliza ran the ranch alone. She was up before dawn every day, tending animals, hauling water, keeping everything running. Caleb watched from the window, frustrated and useless, as she did the work of 2 people without complaint. She came in exhausted every evening, face flushed from exertion, but never mentioned how hard it was. Just made dinner, sat with him while they ate, then collapsed into bed to do it all again the next day. "You're going to hurt yourself," Caleb said one night, watching her wince as she sat down. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. I can see it." "Then look away." But there was no heat in it. She was just tired. "Someone has to do the work, Caleb, and you can't right now." "I know. I just—" He struggled with words he wasn't used to saying. "Thank you. For this. For everything." Eliza looked at him, something soft in her expression. "You don't have to thank me. This is my home too now. Of course I'm going to take care of it." "My home too." The word settled into Caleb's chest next to the injured ribs, and somehow they hurt worse. Because she was right. Somewhere along the way, this had stopped being just his ranch and become theirs. She'd earned her place here through sweat and determination and quiet competence. She belonged, and that terrified him, because belonging meant attachment, and attachment meant vulnerability. By the second week of February, Caleb's ribs had healed enough for him to work again, though Eliza still shot him warning looks whenever he tried to lift anything too heavy. They fell back into their shared routine, but something had shifted during his recovery. There was a new tenderness between them. Small things. Eliza making sure his coffee was exactly how he liked it, Caleb taking on the heavier chores without being asked, both of them checking on the other more frequently. Nothing dramatic, just the quiet care of two people learning to look after each other. One evening, Caleb found Eliza in the main room, the journal he'd given her for Christmas open on her lap. She was writing, face intent, lost in whatever thought she was putting to paper. She looked up when he entered, and he saw her instinctively start to close the journal before stopping herself. "Sorry, I can go." "No, it's fine." She set the journal aside. "I was just writing about this place, about everything that's happened." "Good things or bad things?" "Both. Mostly good, though." She paused. "Do you want to read it?" "No, that's yours. Private." "I know. But I wouldn't mind if you did. Someday." She looked down at her hands. "I write about you sometimes. Us. How strange this all is, and how strange it is that it doesn't feel strange anymore." Caleb sat down across from her. "Do you regret it? Staying?" "No. Do you regret letting me?" He thought about it honestly. The complications, the gossip, the way his carefully constructed isolation had been completely upended. "No, I don't. Even with broken ribs and me running you ragged?" "You didn't run me ragged. I fell on ice like an idiot." "True, but I enjoyed being in charge while you recovered." "I noticed." They smiled at each other, and Caleb felt something warm unfurl in his chest. Not quite happiness. He still wasn't ready to name it that. But something close. Something that felt like the beginning of it. The territorial clerk arrived on a Wednesday in late February, his circuit bringing him through Sweetwater for the first time since autumn. Word spread quickly. This was the last chance before spring to make anything official, file any claims or contracts or marriages that needed territorial recognition. Caleb heard about it at the general store and felt his stomach drop. Marriage. The thing Margaret had wanted. The thing the gossips assumed had already happened. The thing that would make everything between him and Eliza legally binding and permanent. He rode home in a daze, mind churning. They were living as if married already, sharing a home, sharing work, sharing their lives in all the ways that mattered. Making it official would just be paperwork, really. A formality. But it would also be a promise. A commitment. The kind of thing he'd sworn he'd never do again because the first time had ended in so much pain. Eliza was in the garden when he arrived, checking the cold frames she'd built to protect early seedlings. She looked up as he dismounted, and something in his expression made her go still. "What's wrong?" "The territorial clerk is in town. He'll be there through Friday." She understood immediately. He could see it in the way her face went careful, guarded. "I see. People are going to expect—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "People always expect things. That's nothing new." "Eliza, we don't have to do anything, Caleb. We can keep going exactly as we are." Her voice was steady, but he heard the thread of something underneath. Hurt, maybe. Or resignation. "I don't need a piece of paper to tell me I belong here." But that was the problem, wasn't it? She did belong here. She'd proven that 100 times over. And she deserved better than whispers and judgment, better than living in this limbo where their relationship had no name. "What if we did?" The words came out before he could stop them. "Get married, I mean. Make it official." Eliza's hand stilled on the seedlings. Why? Because it would be right. Because she'd earned it. Because the thought of her leaving, of this ending, made him feel hollow. "Because I think we should." That's not a reason, Caleb. That's an evasion. She was right. She deserved better than vague justifications. "I'm not good at this," he said. "At talking about feelings, at being honest about what I want. Sarah used to get so frustrated with me about it." "I'm not Sarah." "I know, you're—" He struggled. "You're you. And these past months, having you here, working alongside you, building this life together. It's been good. Better than good. And I want to keep doing it. Not as employer and employee, not as roommates, but as partners. Real partners." Eliza looked at him for a long moment. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm doing a terrible job of it, but yes, I think I am." "Why now? Because the clerk is in town? Because it would stop the gossip?" "No, because I'm tired of being afraid."
The admission cost him, but it was true. I've been so scared of losing again that I've been half living, keeping everyone at arm's length. But you didn't let me do that. You pushed your way in, made yourself essential, and now I can't imagine doing this without you. That's still not the same as love, Caleb.
He flinched. She was right again. No, it's not. I don't know if I have that left in me. Sarah took most of it when she died, and I don't know if it grows back. Then what are you offering? Honesty, partnership, respect. He moved closer. A home and a life and whatever future we can build together. It might not be everything you deserve, but it's everything I have. Eliza's eyes were bright, but her voice stayed steady. I need to think about it. Of course. Take whatever time you need. She went inside and Caleb stood in the yard feeling like he'd just torn himself open and wasn't sure if he'd bleed out or heal. That night, they ate dinner in silence. Not the comfortable kind they'd grown used to, but heavy and awkward. Caleb kept stealing glances at Eliza, trying to read her expression, but she'd gone carefully blank after she retreated to her room. Caleb heard her moving around, the scratch of pen on paper. Writing in that journal, probably. Trying to sort through everything he'd dumped on her. He sat on the porch, despite the cold, smoking one of the cigars she'd given him, staring at stars so bright and cold they hurt to look at. He'd meant every word. That was the hell of it. He did want her to stay, did want to build something permanent together. But wanting and loving weren't the same thing, and he didn't know if the gap between them could be bridged. The door opened behind him. Eliza stepped out, wrapped in a blanket, and sat down beside him without speaking. They sat like that for a while, sharing the silence and the smoke. I was married for 2 years, Eliza said finally, and for most of that time I was happy. Thomas loved me. I loved him, and we had plans for a future that felt real and possible. Caleb waited. When he died, I thought that was it. My one chance at happiness, gone. I'd never love like that again, never trust like that again. She pulled the blanket tighter. And I was right. I won't love like that again. But maybe that's all right. Eliza, let me finish. She looked at him. What you're offering, partnership, honesty, respect, that's not nothing, Caleb. That's more than a lot of marriages have. And maybe it's enough. Maybe it's even better than what I had before in some ways. You deserve more than enough. So do you. But we don't always get what we deserve. We get what we're brave enough to reach for. She took a breath. So yes, I'll marry you. Not because of gossip or paperwork or convenience, but because I want to keep building this life we've started. Because I choose you, even knowing you're broken. Because I'm broken too, and maybe that means we'll understand each other better than two whole people ever could. Relief flooded through Caleb, so intense it left him shaken. You're sure? No, I'm terrified, but I'm sure enough. That's honest. You wanted honesty. He laughed, the sound surprising him. I did, didn't I? So when do we do this? The clerk leaves Friday. Friday then, if that's not too soon. Caleb, we've been living as married for months. The ceremony is just catching up. They sat together as the temperature dropped and the stars wheeled overhead. Two broken people who'd somehow found their way to each other in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't even close to conventional. But it was real, and it was theirs. Thursday passed in a blur of preparation. There was no time for fancy arrangements, no money for elaborate ceremony. Instead, they focused on the practical: clean clothes, a quick trip to town to inform the clerk, a stop at Frank's for witnesses. About damn time, Frank said when Caleb told him. Everyone's been waiting for you two to make it official. Everyone needs to mind their own business. Good luck with that in a town this size. But Frank was grinning. I'm happy for you, Caleb, truly. Eliza's good people. She is. You love her? The question caught him off guard. It's complicated. It's always complicated. But do you love her? Caleb thought about Eliza's hands in the garden, her laughter over cards, the way she'd taken care of the ranch when he was injured, the space she'd carved out in his life that would feel empty and wrong if she left. I don't know, he admitted, but I want her to stay. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure she never regrets it. Frank clapped him on the shoulder. That'll do to start. Eliza had her own preparations. Mrs. Beatty, who'd grown fond of her during those first few days, helped alter a dress.
Simple blue wool, nothing fancy, but clean and pretty. Annie Porter, the young woman from the harvest celebration, brought wildflowers she'd somehow preserved through winter. "For your hair," Annie said shyly. "Every bride should have flowers." "I'm not that kind of bride," Eliza protested. "Every bride should have flowers," Annie repeated firmly. So when Friday came and they stood before the territorial clerk in a small room at the back of the church, Eliza had flowers woven into her braid and wore a dress that made her look softer, younger. Caleb wore his one good suit, brushed clean, and tried not to think too hard about what he was doing.
Frank and his wife stood as witnesses. Reverend Matthews was there too, though this was a civil ceremony, not religious. A handful of other townspeople had shown up, curious or supportive, hard to say which. The clerk was efficient, matter of fact. He asked the required questions, had them sign the necessary papers, witness their vows. "Do you, Caleb Rourke, take Eliza Vance as your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Eliza Vance, take Caleb Rourke as your lawfully wedded husband?"
"I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife." That was it. No kiss, no dramatic moment, just paperwork and witnesses, and the strange certainty that something fundamental had just changed. They signed the marriage certificate, the clerk stamped it official, and it was done.
Outside, people offered congratulations. Frank's wife hugged Eliza. Annie was teary-eyed with romantic notions. Even Martha Hendricks managed a tight smile, though her disapproval was only temporarily satisfied. They had a brief meal at the boarding house. Mrs. Beatty insisted. Wouldn't take no for an answer. It was simple food, nothing fancy, but it felt celebratory anyway. People toasted them with coffee and cider, shared stories, laughed. Caleb watched Eliza through it all, the way she smiled and thanked people, gracious and composed. She caught him staring once and raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Nothing. Just thinking. Dangerous habit. I'm full of those." The ride back to the ranch was quiet. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. Beautiful, though Caleb had learned not to trust beautiful things. "So," Eliza said as the house came into view, "we're married now." "Apparently. Feel different?" "Not yet. You?" "Ask me tomorrow." They took care of the evening chores together, the familiar routine unchanged by the ceremony. Feed the animals, check the water, secure the barn for the night. Normal tasks, comfortingly ordinary. Inside, Eliza started dinner while Caleb added wood to the stove. They moved around each other with practiced ease. No awkwardness despite the new status of their relationship. But as evening deepened into night, Caleb felt tension creeping in. They were married now, husband and wife, and there were expectations that came with that, traditions and obligations he hadn't thought through carefully enough. Eliza seemed to sense his discomfort. After dinner, she spoke carefully. "Nothing has to change, Caleb. Not unless we both want it to. But we're married now. People will expect—" "I don't care what people expect. This is our marriage, not theirs." She met his eyes. "We move at whatever pace feels right. No rush, no pressure." The relief was enormous. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She smiled slightly. "Besides, I like my room. The morning sun comes in perfect." "All right then. Separate rooms. For now." "For now," she agreed. They cleaned up together, banking the fire for the night, preparing for tomorrow's work. At her bedroom door, Eliza paused. "Caleb?" "Yeah? Thank you for being honest about what you could offer. A lot of men would have lied, made promises they couldn't keep." "I've never been good at lying." "I know. It's one of the things I like about you." She went inside, and Caleb stood in the hallway for a moment, turning over those words. "One of the things I like about you. Not love. Not yet. But like was something. Like was honest. He could work with honest." In his own room, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, Caleb thought about the vows they'd made. The promises to honor and support each other, to build a life together. He'd meant them, but he'd also held back the biggest promise. The one about love. Maybe that would come later. Or maybe they'd build something else. Something that didn't fit traditional definitions but worked for them. Either way, they were married now. Legal and binding. For better or worse, Eliza Vance, Eliza Rourke now, was his wife. And lying there in the dark, listening to the house settle around him, Caleb realized he was glad. March came in hard, with a late blizzard that buried the ranch under 18 inches of fresh snow. Caleb woke to find the world outside transformed again, white and silent and suffocating. Beside him, no, not beside him, down the hall in her own room, Eliza would be waking too, assessing the work that lay ahead. They'd been married 3 weeks, and if anything had changed, it was subtle. They still worked the same routines, ate meals together, spent evenings by the fire. But there was a new ease between them, a relaxation he hadn't expected, like making the commitment official had actually reduced the tension rather than increasing it. Caleb dressed and found Eliza already in the kitchen, staring out the window at the snow. "We'll need to dig out the barn," she said without turning. "I know. And check the north fence. That much weight could have brought it down." "I know." She looked at him then, and there was something in her expression he couldn't quite read. "You ever think about what happens when winter finally ends?" "Spring, usually." "Smart ass." But she was almost smiling. "I mean, what happens with us? We've been in survival mode for months. What happens when we don't have to just survive?" It was a good question, one Caleb had been carefully not thinking about. "Guess we'll find out." They spent the day digging out, clearing paths, checking for damage. The north fence had indeed collapsed. 3 posts snapped under the weight. It would need complete rebuilding, but that would have to wait for better weather. That night, exhausted and sore, they sat by the fire later than usual. Eliza was mending one of Caleb's shirts, her needle moving in neat, precise stitches. "I've been thinking about the garden," she said suddenly. "What about it?" "What I want to plant come spring. More vegetables, obviously, but also flowers. Real ones, not just wildflowers." She paused. "Sarah's garden, the one that used to be there, did she plant flowers?" The question should have hurt, but it didn't, not anymore. "Roses mostly, and some kind of purple thing. I can't remember the name. She loved purple." "Would you mind if I planted different ones?" Caleb looked at her carefully. "You asking permission?" "I'm asking if it would bother you. There's a difference." He thought about it honestly. Sarah's garden had been dead for 3 years, and no amount of wishing would bring it back. Eliza planting something new wouldn't erase what had been there before. It would just be different. "Plant whatever you want," he said. "It's your garden now." "Our garden." "If you want." Eliza set down her mending. "Caleb, can I ask you something?" "You're going to anyway." "Do you still think about her every day, Sarah?" The question caught him off guard, but it was fair. "Most days?" "Less than I used to. Why?" "Because I still think about Thomas. Not constantly, not like before, but he's still there, and I wondered if that bothers you." "No, he was your husband. You loved him. That doesn't just disappear because he's gone." "Even though I married you?" "Even though," Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I'm not trying to replace what you had, Eliza. And I'm not expecting you to replace what I had. We're just building something new. With the ghost still in the room, maybe, but new anyway." "That's very practical." "I'm a practical man." "You're an emotionally stunted man trying to pass it off as practical." He barked a laugh, surprised. "That too. But I appreciate the honesty." She picked up her mending again. "For what it's worth, I think about you more than I think about him now. The day-to-day stuff, I mean. What you'll want for dinner, whether your coat needs patching, if you're pushing yourself too hard with the work. That's just because I'm here and he's not. Maybe. Or maybe it's because you're my husband now, and that means something even if we're both too scared to examine it too closely." They sat with that for a while, the fire crackling, the wind howling outside. 2 people fumbling towards something neither of them quite understood yet. "When the thaw comes," Eliza said eventually, "I want to fix up that old nursery, the room past ours." Caleb's hands tightened on his knees. "Why?" "Because it's just sitting there empty and full of dust. We could use it for storage or a proper sewing room or a nursery again." She went very still. "I didn't say that." "But you were thinking it." "Were you?" Caleb stood, suddenly needing distance. The nursery had been Samuel's room before he got big enough to share with them. After the fever, Caleb had closed the door and never opened it again. The thought of going in there, of seeing the small bed and the wooden toys he'd carved, felt impossible. "I can't," he said roughly. "Not that room." "All right." Eliza's voice was calm, accepting. We'll leave it closed. I'm sorry.
Don't be. I shouldn't have brought it up.
But she should have. They were married, and married people had children. It was natural for her to think about it. Hell, at 26, she probably wanted children more than she was saying. The thought sat heavy in Caleb's gut all night. The blizzard broke 2 days later, and the cleanup took a week. During that time, Caleb found himself watching Eliza more closely, noticing things he'd missed before. The way she unconsciously touched her stomach sometimes. The wistful look that crossed her face when they passed families with children in town. The careful way she'd mentioned the nursery. She wanted a child. Maybe not immediately, maybe not with certainty, but the want was there. And Caleb didn't know if he could give her that. The thought of another child, another small life to lose, was terrifying. Samuel's death had nearly destroyed him. How could he survive that a second time? But keeping Eliza childless because of his fear seemed equally cruel. One evening, working in the barn while Eliza made dinner, Caleb found himself standing in front of the old trunk where he'd stored Samuel's things. He'd packed them away the day after the funeral, unable to look at them, but equally unable to throw them away. His hands shook as he opened the lid. Inside, carefully wrapped, were all the small remnants of his son's short life. Clothes, worn soft from washing, a stuffed horse with one ear missing, the wooden train Caleb had made that last Christmas, a small pair of boots that had never been outgrown. Caleb picked up the train, turning it over in his hands. He'd spent weeks carving it, getting every detail right, wanting it to be perfect. Samuel had loved it, carried it everywhere, made train sounds that drove Sarah to laughing distraction. He sat there in the barn, holding his dead son's toy, and let himself remember. Not just the grief, but the joy that had come before it. The way Samuel had laughed high and bright, how he'd insisted on helping with every chore, even when he made more work than he saved. The questions, endless questions about everything. Caleb had been happy then, genuinely, completely happy in a way he'd forgotten was possible. And then it had all ended. But sitting there now, the memories didn't hurt quite as much as they used to. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it had dulled to something manageable, something he could carry without being crushed by it. Caleb? He looked up to find Eliza in the barn doorway, concern on her face. Dinner's ready. I came to find... She saw the open trunk, the train in his hands, and understanding crossed her face. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. You're not interrupting. He stood, carefully placing the train back in the trunk. I was just remembering. Eliza came closer, looking down at the contents of the trunk. May I? He nodded. She knelt, gently touching the clothes, the toys. He was so small. 4 years old, just 4. Thomas wanted children, Eliza said softly. We were going to start trying after we'd saved enough for the house, and then he died, and I thought that chance died with him. And now, she looked up at him, now I'm married again, to a man who's terrified of the possibility. I'm not, but the denial died on his lips. He was terrified. Yeah, I am. I know, and I understand it. She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. But Caleb, we can't live our whole lives afraid of what might happen. That's not living. That's just waiting to die. Spoken like someone who hasn't lost a child. The words came out harsher than he intended, and he saw Eliza flinch. But she didn't back down. You're right. I haven't. But I've lost enough to know that the fear of losing doesn't make the losing any easier when it comes. All it does is poison the time before. She left him there, went back to the house. Caleb stayed in the barn, staring at the trunk, turning her words over in his mind. Dinner was quiet that night. Not hostile, but careful. They'd hit a wall, found the edge of what they could easily navigate together. Later, lying in his bed, Caleb stared at the ceiling and forced himself to think about the future. Really think about it. Not just the next day or week or month, but years down the road. Did he want children with Eliza? The question made his chest tight with conflicting emotions. Fear, yes, but also something else, something that might have been hope if he squinted at it right. Eliza would be a good mother, patient, practical, strong enough to survive the hard parts. And maybe a child would fill some of the empty spaces in both of them. Maybe it would give them something to build toward instead of just away from their pasts. Or maybe it would break them both when it inevitably ended. Because that was the thing nobody said out loud. Everything ended. Every good thing eventually turned to grief. That was just how life worked. But Eliza was right too. You couldn't live in constant fear of the ending. At some point, you had to decide the middle parts were worth the inevitable conclusion. Caleb didn't come to any conclusions that night, but he kept thinking about it, turning the possibility over like a stone in his hands, testing its weight. April brought the thaw, and with it a transformation of the landscape. Snow melted into running water, brown earth emerged, and the world smelled like dirt and new growth. The ranch came alive in ways that made the brutal winter feel like a bad dream. Eliza attacked the garden with renewed energy, turning soil, planting rows, organizing seeds. She'd sent away for a catalog and spent hours poring over it, making lists and diagrams with intense focus. "You're going to grow enough to feed half the county," Caleb observed one afternoon. "Just planning ahead. If we have a good growing season, we can preserve more, sell some in town, build up savings." "For what?" She looked up from her diagram. "Whatever comes next. Livestock expansion, equipment repairs, emergencies, or," she paused, "or other things." The unspoken hung between them. Other things like children, like a future that required planning and saving and hope. Caleb didn't push, just nodded and went back to work on the fence repair. But that night, he brought it up. "The nursery," he said abruptly, making Eliza look up from her book. "We could fix it up, not right away, but eventually." Her expression was carefully neutral. "You're sure?" "No. But I think we should anyway." "Why?" "Because you were right. We can't live in fear of what might happen. And because," he struggled with the words, "because I think maybe I want that. Eventually. A child. With you." Eliza set down her book slowly. "That's not a decision to make lightly. I know. And it's not something we need to rush into. I know that too. But you're saying you're open to the possibility?" "I'm saying I'm trying to be. It's hard, Eliza. Every time I think about it, I see Samuel's grave and I can't breathe. But I also see you and the life we're building, and I think maybe there's room for more in it." She crossed to him, took his hands in hers. "We take this slow. No pressure, no timeline. Just possibility." "Possibility," Caleb agreed. They stood there, hands clasped, making a promise neither of them was entirely sure they could keep but choosing to try anyway. The spring work consumed them both. Caleb started repairs on the barn roof, replaced the collapsed section of north fence, began planning which fields to plant. Eliza got her garden in, vegetables and herbs and the flowers she'd promised, seeds that would take months to show results but represented faith in a future harvest. They worked in parallel and together, the rhythm of their partnership settling into something comfortable. Most days were good. Some were hard, old griefs rising up unexpectedly. But they learned to navigate both, to give each other space when needed and company when wanted. One Saturday, they went to town together for supplies. The looks they got were different now, less speculation, more acceptance. They were a married couple, properly legal, and while some people still whispered, it was losing its edge of scandal. At the general store, Mrs. Chen greeted them warmly. "Mrs. Rourke, I have those seeds you ordered." Eliza smiled at the name. She'd been Eliza Rourke for 2 months now, but it still seemed to surprise her when people used it. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen." While Eliza looked over the seed packets, Caleb noticed Annie Porter hovering near the fabric section. She kept glancing over, clearly wanting to approach but uncertain. "Go ahead," he told Eliza. "I'll load the supplies." Outside, loading sacks of grain, he found himself approached by Frank. "You look different," Frank observed. "How so?" "Less like you're waiting for the world to end." Frank leaned against the wagon. "Marriage agrees with you." "It's complicated." "It's always complicated. But you seem, I don't know, more present. Like you're actually living instead of just going through motions." Caleb thought about that. Was he more present? Maybe. The constant numbness that had characterized the last 3 years had definitely eased. He felt things now, frustration, amusement, even occasional joy. Small emotions, but real. "Eliza's good for me," he admitted. "She's good, period, but yeah, you two seem to work." Inside, Eliza was deep in conversation with Annie, both of them examining fabric samples with intense focus. When she caught Caleb watching, she smiled, a real smile, warm and unguarded, and something in his chest loosened. Maybe Frank was right. Maybe he was actually living again. The ride home was companionable, Eliza chattering about her conversation with Annie, plans for curtains, and a new tablecloth. Caleb listened, adding occasional comments, content to let her enthusiasm wash over him. Annie's engaged, Eliza said, to the blacksmith's apprentice. She's nervous about it. Why? Because she's 19 and he's 22 and neither of them knows what they're doing. I told her nobody knows what they're doing. You just figure it out as you go. Wise advice. Coming from someone who's figuring it out herself. Eliza glanced at him. Are we doing all right with the figuring it out part? I think so. Are we? Yeah, I think we are. Simple words, but they settled something in Caleb. They were all right. Not perfect, not without complications, but all right. And that was more than he'd dared hope for 6 months ago. May brought warmth and growth. The garden flourished under Eliza's care, green shoots pushing up in neat rows. The cattle fattened on spring grass. The ranch felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. One evening, Caleb came in from checking the herd to find Eliza standing in the doorway of the nursery. She hadn't opened it, just stood looking at the closed door. You all right? He asked. I was thinking about what you said, about fixing it up eventually. She turned to face him. How eventual is eventually? I don't know. Why? She bit her lip, uncertain in a way he rarely saw. Because I think I might be pregnant. The world tilted. Caleb grabbed the doorframe for balance, his mind going completely blank. You think? He managed. I'm 3 weeks late. That's never happened before. Her hand moved to her stomach in that unconscious gesture he'd noticed before. It might be nothing, stress, or the change in seasons, or a dozen other things. But it might be a baby. Maybe. They stood there in the hallway, the closed nursery door between them and a future that had suddenly become very immediate. How do you feel about it? Caleb asked. Terrified? Excited? Sick with worry? She laughed shakily. All of it at once. You? Same, except more terrified. We said we'd take it slow. Apparently our bodies had other plans. Eliza moved closer, took his hands. If I am pregnant, and that's still an if, nothing has to change right away. We have months. Time to adjust, to prepare, to panic appropriately. I'm already panicking. I know. Me too. She squeezed his hands. But we'll figure it out, like we've figured out everything else. Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. She fit against him perfectly, like she'd been designed for this exact spot. He could feel her heart beating, fast and hard, matching his own. We should probably know for sure, he said into her hair. The doctor's not in Sweetwater until next week. Then we wait until next week. They stood there holding each other, the possibility of new life between them, and Caleb felt something shift in his chest. Not quite hope. He was still too scared for that. But something close. Something that felt like the beginning of it. That night, lying in his bed, knowing Eliza was in hers, possibly carrying his child, Caleb couldn't sleep. His mind spun through 1,000 scenarios. What if she was pregnant? What if she wasn't? What if something went wrong? What if everything went right? He got up, paced, ended up standing outside her door. Can't sleep either? Eliza's voice came from inside. No. Come in. He opened the door. She was sitting up in bed, wrapped in blankets, looking as unsettled as he felt. Talk to me, she said. Tell me what you're thinking. So he did. Told her about his fears, his memories of Samuel, his terror of losing again. Told her about the small, fragile hope that maybe this time would be different. Told her everything he'd been holding back because he didn't know how to say it. And she listened, didn't try to fix it or minimize it. Just let him talk until the words ran out. I'm scared too, she said when he finished. Of my body failing, of losing a baby, of not being a good mother, of dying in childbirth like so many women do. Eliza. But I'm also hopeful. Because we've survived so much already, and we've done it together, and maybe that means we can survive this too. Whatever happens. Caleb sat on the edge of her bed. When did you get so brave? I'm not brave. I'm just tired of letting fear make my decisions. She reached for his hand, and he took it. They sat there in the darkness, holding on to each other, two people facing an uncertain future with nothing but each other to hold on to. Stay, Eliza said quietly. Just for tonight. I don't want to be alone. So Caleb lay down beside her, fully clothed, on top of the blankets. She curled against his side, head on his shoulder, and they stayed like that until dawn. Not as lovers, but as partners. As two people who'd chosen each other and were trying to figure out what came next. When morning came, nothing was resolved. They still didn't know if Eliza was pregnant. Still didn't know if they could survive another loss. Still didn't know if they had enough love between them to build a real family. But they got up and faced the day together. Made coffee, did chores, worked the land that was slowly becoming theirs in every sense of the word. And that felt like enough. The week until the doctor's visit crawled by with agonizing slowness. Caleb found himself watching Eliza constantly, looking for signs, changes, anything that might confirm or deny what they both suspected. She caught him staring more than once. "I'm not going to suddenly start showing overnight," she said on the third day, exasperated but amused. "I know, You're worried. I know. So am I." They worked through the anxiety, channeling it into the endless tasks the ranch demanded. Caleb repaired the barn roof with meticulous attention to detail, each nail driven with more force than necessary. Eliza attacked the weeds in her garden like they were personal enemies, pulling them out by the roots with grim determination. When Saturday finally arrived, they rode into Sweetwater together, both silent with tension. The doctor kept a small office above the general store, seeing patients 2 Saturdays a month. Caleb had avoided the man for 3 years, hadn't needed a doctor, hadn't wanted the questions or the concern. But now they climbed the narrow stairs, Eliza's hand tight in his. Dr. Morrison was in his 60s, gray-haired and efficient. He listened to Eliza's symptoms without judgment, asked practical questions, then conducted a brief examination while Caleb waited outside, pacing the hallway like a caged animal. When the door opened, Eliza emerged first. Her face was unreadable. "Well?" Caleb asked, unable to wait. "Mrs. Rourke is indeed pregnant," Dr. Morrison said, appearing behind her. "I'd estimate about 6 weeks along, due sometime in late December or early January." The world tilted again. 6 weeks. December. A baby. "And she's healthy?" Caleb heard himself ask. "Everything's all right?" "As far as I can tell, but Mrs. Rourke, you'll need to take care. No heavy lifting, plenty of rest, good nutrition. I'll want to see you monthly to monitor progress." "Of course," Eliza said faintly. They left with a list of instructions and dietary recommendations, walking down the stairs in stunned silence. Outside in the bright May sunshine, they looked at each other. "We're having a baby," Eliza said. "Yeah, we are." "You're terrified." "Absolutely. You?" "Completely." But she was almost smiling. "But also, I think I'm happy? Is that allowed?" Caleb pulled her close, right there on the street, not caring who saw. "It's allowed." They held each other while Sweetwater carried on around them, two people facing the biggest uncertainty of their lives with nothing but each other to hold on to. The ride home was different from the ride in. The news had settled, becoming real, and with it came a strange mix of terror and wonder. Caleb kept glancing at Eliza, trying to wrap his mind around the fact that inside her, impossibly small, was their child. "We need to fix up the nursery," Eliza said, practical as always. "And get supplies. The baby will need clothes, blankets, a cradle. We have time. 7 months isn't as much time as you think. Eliza, slow down. We don't have to do everything today." She took a shaky breath. "I know. I need to do something, plan something, or I'll just sit here panicking about all the things that could go wrong." Caleb understood that impulse. Action was easier than waiting, doing easier than feeling. "All right," he said. "We'll make a list. Start planning. But we do it together, and we don't let the fear take over. Deal?" "Deal." That evening, they sat at the kitchen table with paper and pencil, making lists. What the baby would need, what the nursery required, what repairs should be done before winter when the baby was due. It was practical and grounding, turning the overwhelming into manageable tasks. "We'll need help," Eliza said, tallying costs. "Someone who knows about childbirth can be there when the time comes." "The doctor might not make it in time if there's weather, or if it happens fast. We need a backup plan." Caleb thought of the women in town, the ones with experience. Mrs. Beatty delivered 3 of her own and helped with a dozen others. She'd come if we asked. "You trust her?" "Yeah, I do." Eliza added it to the list. They worked until the lamp oil ran low, planning for a future that still felt impossible and inevitable all at once. In bed that night, Caleb lay awake staring at the ceiling. In the room down the hall, Eliza was doing the same. He could hear her shifting, restless. They'd slept in the same bed that one night when everything was uncertain, but since the confirmation, they'd retreated to their separate spaces, like they needed distance to process what was coming. But lying there alone, Caleb found himself wanting the comfort of her presence. Not for anything physical, just for the reassurance that they were facing this together. He got up, patted down the hall, knocked softly on her door. "Come in." Eliza was sitting up in bed, the journal he'd given her open on her lap. She looked up as he entered, and understanding crossed her face. "Can't sleep?" "No. You?" "I keep thinking about all the things that could go wrong." Caleb sat on the edge of the bed. "Me too." "Samuel..." She stopped, careful. "What happened with him? With the fever, I mean. How long did it take?" It was the first time she'd asked directly about his son's death. Caleb took a breath, forcing himself to answer honestly. 3 days. He got sick on a Tuesday. By Friday, he was gone. Sarah lasted a week longer, but I think she was just holding on because I wasn't ready to let go. "Were you with them at the end?" "Every moment. I held Samuel while his throat closed, and I held Sarah's hand until there was nothing left to hold on to." Eliza reached for his hand. "I'm so sorry." "I know, and I'm sorry about Thomas, about the fire, the unfairness of it all." They sat there in the quiet darkness, hands clasped, two people bound by shared loss and shared hope. "I don't want to lose this baby," Eliza whispered. "I know that's not something I can control, but I want it so badly it scares me." "Me too. But if something does go wrong, if I lose it, or if something happens to me..." "Don't," Caleb said sharply. "Don't go there." "We have to think about it, Caleb. Women die in childbirth all the time. It's not being morbid, it's being realistic." "I can't..." He couldn't finish. The thought of losing Eliza, of being left alone again, was unbearable. Worse even than losing the baby, which made him feel guilty but was undeniably true. "If something happens to me," Eliza continued, gentle but firm, "you have to promise you'll take care of the baby. Love it, raise it, not shut it away like you shut away Samuel's things." "Eliza, promise me." He looked at her, this woman who'd pushed her way into his life and refused to let him hide, and knew he couldn't deny her this. "I promise. But you have to promise me something too." "What?" "That you'll fight. Whatever happens, however hard it gets, you fight to stay alive. Because I can't do this without you. Any of it." Eliza's eyes were bright with tears. "I promise." They held each other then, and Caleb felt something shift in his chest. Not quite love, he still didn't know if he had that left in him, but something close, something that felt like it could grow into love given time and care. "Stay," Eliza said for the second time. "I don't want to be alone tonight." So Caleb stayed, and they slept curled together, finding comfort in proximity. And when morning came, they woke together, facing the future as partners. June arrived with heat and hard work. The ranch demanded constant attention, cattle to move, hay to cut, fences to maintain. Caleb threw himself into it, but he was careful now, aware that Eliza couldn't do as much as she used to. She chafed at the restrictions, tried to push through anyway. He caught her hauling water one afternoon, even though the doctor had explicitly forbidden it. "What are you doing?" "The garden needs water." "I'll do it. You're supposed to be resting." "I'm pregnant, not fragile. There's a difference." "Eliza..." "Don't coddle me, Caleb. I'll go crazy if you treat me like I'm made of glass." They fought about it, sharp words in the afternoon heat. It was their first real fight since getting married, and it left them both shaken. That evening, Caleb approached carefully. "I'm sorry for being overprotective." "I'm sorry, too, for being stubborn." Eliza sighed. "I'm just scared. If I stop being useful, if I can't contribute..." "You think I'll what? Send you away?" "Eliza, you're having my child. You're my wife. You could sit on the porch for 7 months straight and you'd still belong here." "That's not how I was raised. Women work. They contribute. Sitting idle feels wrong." "Then don't sit idle. Just don't hurt yourself trying to prove something that doesn't need proving." They found a compromise. Eliza kept working the garden, but Caleb handled the heavy tasks. She took over the household completely, cooking and mending and organizing. They divided labor more carefully, paying attention to what she could safely do. It wasn't perfect. She still pushed too hard sometimes. He still worried too much. But they were learning, adjusting, figuring out how to move through this together. As summer deepened, Eliza's body began to change in subtle ways. Her waist thickened slightly. Her face lost some of its sharpness, softening. She tired more easily, needing naps in the afternoon. Caleb found himself fascinated by the changes, the physical evidence of the life growing inside her. Sometimes at night, lying beside her, they'd given up the pretense of separate rooms. He'd place his hand on her stomach, trying to imagine what was happening beneath skin and muscle. "You won't feel anything yet," Eliza said one night, amused. "It's too early." "I know, but it's still amazing that there's a person in there. Half a person, more like a being according to the doctor's illustrations. A being that's going to be our child. Our very small bean-sized child." They laughed together and it felt good. Normal. Like maybe they could actually do this. July brought the first real kick. Eliza was sitting on the porch shelling peas when it happened. A flutter, then a distinct nudge against her hand. "Caleb," she called, and he came running, thinking something was wrong. "What? Are you all right?" The baby moved. I felt it move. He knelt beside her, placing his hand where hers had been. For a long moment, nothing. Then, there, a tiny bump against his palm, like a butterfly wing. Caleb looked up at Eliza, and she was crying. Happy tears, surprised tears, overwhelmed tears. "That's our baby," she said wonderingly. "Yeah, it is." They stayed like that, hands on her growing belly, feeling the small movements that meant life and hope and terrifying possibility. That night, Caleb finally opened the nursery door. The room was exactly as he'd left it 3 years ago, dusty and abandoned, full of ghosts. Samuel's small bed still had its blankets. The toys Caleb had carved sat on the shelf. Even the curtains Sarah had made hung at the windows, faded but intact. It hurt to look at, but it was time. Eliza appeared beside him, surveying the room with careful eyes. "We don't have to use this room if it's too hard." "No, we should." Caleb took a breath. "Samuel's gone. Keeping this room as a shrine won't bring him back. And this baby, our baby, deserves a real nursery, not the ghost of one." "What do you want to do with his things?" Caleb looked at the small bed, the toys, the evidence of a life that had been too brief. "Pack them away properly, in the trunk in the barn. Someday, when the baby's older, we can show them. Tell them about their brother." Together, they cleared the room. It took hours, each item a small grief that had to be acknowledged and set aside. Eliza was patient, letting Caleb move at his own pace, not pushing. When the room was finally empty, Caleb stood in the center, feeling lighter and heavier all at once. "We'll paint it," Eliza said, practical and forward-looking. "Fix the window, make new curtains, turn it into something new." "What color?" "I don't know yet. Something cheerful. Something that doesn't carry any memories except the ones we make." Over the next weeks, they transformed the nursery. Caleb painted the walls a soft yellow, Eliza's choice, sunny and optimistic. She made new curtains from fabric Annie helped her pick out, cheerful gingham that let in light. They brought in the cradle from the barn, the one Caleb had built for Samuel, and refinished it together. It was hard work, emotional and physical, but it was also healing, turning a space of grief into one of hope. August brought brutal heat and the harvest. The garden produced abundantly under Eliza's care, and they spent long days preserving everything they could. Canning vegetables, drying herbs, storing root crops in the cellar. Eliza worked despite her growing belly, which was now undeniably round. She moved slower, needed more breaks, but her determination never wavered. "You're nesting," Caleb observed one afternoon, watching her reorganize the kitchen for the third time. "I'm preparing." "Same thing." "Maybe." She rearranged jars on the shelf with intense focus. "I want everything ready, in case the baby comes early, or if I can't do things after you give birth." "Yes." The unspoken fear hung between them. Childbirth was dangerous. They both knew it. All the preparation in the world couldn't change that fundamental risk. You're going to be fine, Caleb said, because he had to believe it. You don't know that. No, but I'm choosing to believe it anyway. Eliza looked at him, and something passed between them. An acknowledgement of fear, yes, but also a decision to hope, despite it. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color in the distant hills. Eliza was 6 months along now, her belly prominent, movements awkward. The baby moved constantly, strong kicks that sometimes startled her. Caleb found himself talking to her stomach, which made Eliza laugh. The baby can't hear you yet. How do you know? The doctor said, the doctor doesn't know everything. He placed his hand on her belly, felt a responding kick. See? The baby knows my voice. The baby has hiccups. Hiccups in response to my voice, that's communication. They were happy in those days, in a way neither of them had expected to be. The fear was still there, would always be there. But it was balanced by joy, by anticipation, by the simple pleasure of building a life together. One evening, sitting on the porch watching the sunset, Eliza spoke quietly. I love you, you know. Caleb went very still. They hadn't said those words to each other, hadn't even discussed love since that first conversation about what he could offer. You don't have to say it back, Eliza continued. I just wanted you to know. I didn't expect it to happen, but it did. Somewhere between fixing fences and fighting about water hauling, I fell in love with you. Caleb turned to look at her. This woman who'd come into his life as a stranger and become essential, who'd pushed and challenged and refused to let him hide. Who was carrying his child and facing the future with courage he could only aspire to. I don't know if what I feel is love, he said honestly. Not the way I love Sarah. That was different, easier maybe. We grew up together, fell in love young, built a life from nothing complicated. I know, but what I feel for you, he struggled for words. It's deeper, harder earned. You've seen the worst of me and stayed. You've taken my broken pieces and built something alongside your own broken pieces, and we've made something that works. That's not less than love. It might be more. Eliza's eyes were wet. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Really? Because it sounded pretty unromantic to me. No, it's perfect. It's honest. She took his hand. I don't need flowery words or easy declarations. I just need you, the real you, with all the rough edges and complicated grief. You've got me. Had me for a while now, probably. They sat together as the sun finished setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Two people who'd found each other in the aftermath of loss, building something that maybe didn't fit traditional definitions, but was theirs nonetheless. October arrived with the first frost, a reminder that winter was coming. Eliza was 7 months pregnant now, moving carefully, sleeping poorly. The baby seemed to have grown to impossible proportions, pressing on everything, making her uncomfortable. Caleb did what he could, rubbed her swollen feet, brought pillows to support her back, took over all the heavy work without being asked. He was terrified, watching her struggle, knowing what was coming. The doctor visited monthly now, checking Eliza's progress, answering questions, preparing them for what to expect. Mrs. Beatty came too, bringing practical advice from experience. The pain is bad, she told Eliza bluntly. I won't lie about that, but it ends. And what you get afterward makes it worth it. What if something goes wrong? Then I'll do everything I can to make it right, but worrying about it now won't change anything. Practical wisdom from a practical woman. It helped, a little. November brought snow and the final preparations. The nursery was complete. Yellow walls, gingham curtains, the refinished cradle waiting. They'd accumulated clothes through gifts and purchases, tiny garments that seemed impossibly small. Eliza spent hours folding and refolding them, organizing and reorganizing the dresser, nesting with intense focus. What if I'm not good at this? She asked one night. At what? Being a mother. What if I do everything wrong? You won't. You don't know that. I know you. You're stubborn and practical, and you don't give up on things. You'll figure it out. My mother wasn't very good at it. She was cold, distant. What if I'm like her? Caleb pulled her close, careful of her belly. You're nothing like her. You're warm and present, and you already love this baby. That's more than enough to start. She cried then, hormones and fear and exhaustion all catching up at once. He held her while she sobbed, offering what comfort he could, wishing he could take away the uncertainty. December arrived cold and dark. Eliza was huge now, miserable and ready to be done. The baby dropped lower, a sign that labor was approaching. They stayed close to the ranch, prepared for the possibility it could happen any day. On a Tuesday morning, ironically a Tuesday just like Samuel, Eliza's water broke. She was in the kitchen making coffee when it happened. One moment fine, the next standing in a puddle, looking up at Caleb with wide eyes. It's time. Caleb's mind went blank with panic. Then training kicked in. They'd planned for this, prepared. All right, let me get Mrs. Beatty. You get to bed. Caleb, I'll be fast, 20 minutes, maybe less. He grabbed his coat, tried to keep his hands from shaking. You'll be fine. We'll all be fine. The ride to town was the longest 20 minutes of his life. He pushed the horse hard, not caring about anything except getting back with help. Mrs. Beatty was ready. They'd warned her weeks ago, and she came without hesitation, bringing her supplies and her calm competence. Back at the ranch, Eliza was in bed, breathing through contractions. Her face was pale, but determined. About time, she said when they arrived. These are getting worse. What followed was the longest day of Caleb's life. Hours of labor, Eliza working through pain with gritted teeth determination. Mrs. Beatty calm and efficient, checking progress, offering encouragement. And Caleb, useless except to hold Eliza's hand and watch her suffer. I can't, Eliza gasped at one point, exhausted beyond measure. I can't do this. You can, Mrs. Beatty said firmly. You are doing it. Almost there. Caleb, I'm here. I'm right here. He wiped sweat from her face, helpless and terrified. You're doing so well. Just keep going. She screamed through the next contraction, a sound that tore through him. This was worse than the war, worse than anything he'd survived, because this was Eliza suffering and he couldn't fix it. Push, Mrs. Beatty commanded. Now, push hard. Eliza bore down, face red with effort, making sounds he'd never heard from her, again and again, until finally, a baby's cry split the air. Caleb's vision blurred with tears. That sound, angry and alive and perfect, was the most beautiful thing he'd ever heard. It's a boy, Mrs. Beatty announced, cleaning the baby efficiently. Healthy, strong lungs, all fingers and toes present. A boy. A son. She placed the baby on Eliza's chest, and Caleb saw his wife's face transform. Exhaustion replaced by wonder, pain forgotten in the immediate rush of love. Hi, Eliza whispered to the baby. Hi, little one. We've been waiting for you. Caleb reached out with a shaking hand, touching his son's tiny fingers. They curled around his thumb automatically, a grip impossibly strong for something so small. He's perfect, Caleb managed through tears. He is, isn't he? Eliza looked up at him, glowing despite her exhaustion. We did it. We actually did it. You did it. I just held your hand. That's all I needed. Mrs. Beatty finished her work, checked Eliza over thoroughly, then gave them privacy. Call if you need anything. Otherwise, I'll come back tomorrow to check on everyone. Alone with their son, Caleb and Eliza could only stare in wonder. The baby was small but sturdy, with a thatch of dark hair and eyes that would probably change color. He had Caleb's nose, Eliza's mouth, and an expression of deep concentration as he tried to figure out this strange new world. What should we name him? Eliza asked. Caleb had thought about this, had known, deep down, what name he wanted to use, but had been afraid to say it. Ethan, he said quietly. I was thinking Ethan. It had been his father's name, the man in the photograph Eliza had found, who died at Shiloh. It felt right to honor that, to tie this new life to the past without being consumed by it. Ethan Rourke, Eliza said, testing it. I like it. You're sure? We can pick something else. No. Ethan is perfect. They stayed like that for hours, just the three of them, learning each other. Ethan nursed for the first time, clumsy but determined. Eliza fed him, changed him, marveled at every small thing he did. And Caleb watched them both, his wife and his son. and felt something in his chest finally heal. The days that followed were exhausting. Ethan woke every few hours needing to eat, crying with impressive volume. Eliza was sore and tired, recovering from the ordeal of birth. Caleb was running on no sleep and pure adrenaline. But they were happy. Genuinely, impossibly happy. Watching Eliza with Ethan, Caleb saw the mother she'd worried she wouldn't be. She was patient and attentive, learning his cries, figuring out what he needed. Natural in a way she'd feared she wouldn't be. And holding his son, feeling that small, warm weight in his arms, Caleb found himself talking to Ethan constantly, telling him about the ranch, about the plans for spring, about his brother Samuel, who'd have loved meeting him. "You're rambling," Eliza said one night, amused as Caleb explained crop rotation to a week-old baby. "He needs to know these things. He needs to sleep mostly. Sleep is overrated. Education is important." She laughed, and the sound filled the house with warmth. December became January. The new year arrived with Ethan 6 weeks old, growing fast, beginning to focus on faces and make small cooing sounds. The ranch work continued. Animals still needed tending even in winter. But it felt different now. Not just surviving, but building. Creating a future for this small person who'd become the center of their world. One evening in late January, Caleb found Eliza sitting in the nursery, rocking Ethan to sleep. The lamplight made everything soft and golden, and she was humming, the same tuneless, wandering melody Sarah used to hum. But it didn't hurt to hear it. It felt right, like a circle completing. Eliza looked up as he entered, smiled. "He's almost out." Caleb leaned against the doorframe watching them. His wife and his son, in the room that had once been a shrine to grief but was now full of new life. "I love you," he said, and meant it completely. Eliza's eyes widened. It was the first time he'd said it without qualification or hesitation. "Say it again." "I love you, both of you. More than I thought I could love anything again." "Took you long enough to admit it. I'm stubborn. I know. It's one of the things I love about you." Ethan stirred, making a small sound, then settled back to sleep. They stayed there in the quiet nursery, a family bound by choice and love and hard-won hope. The winter continued its course, brutal and beautiful by turns. But inside the ranch house, warmth and life thrived. Ethan grew, Eliza recovered her strength, and Caleb learned that happiness wasn't something that disappeared when you lost it once. It could come back, different but real, if you were brave enough to reach for it. Spring would come eventually. The garden would bloom again. The cattle would calve, the work would continue, life would move forward. But standing there in the nursery with his family, Caleb realized the future had already arrived. He wasn't waiting for something better anymore. This was it. The life he'd built from ashes, the family he'd found in unexpected places, the home that had finally become more than just a place to exist. Years later, sitting on that porch with Eliza while Ethan played in the yard, no longer a baby, but a sturdy 5-year-old chasing chickens, Caleb would think back to that moment on the train platform when everything changed. The moment when a dust-covered woman stepped off the train and he made the choice to let her stay. Everything that came after, the slow building of trust, the marriage, the baby, the life they'd created together, all of it traced back to that one decision, the decision not to send her away. "What are you thinking about?" Eliza asked, noticing his expression. "The beginning. How different everything could have been. If you'd sent me back on that train?" "Yeah." "Would you have? Really?" Caleb thought about it honestly. "I don't know. Part of me wanted to, but I think another part knew, even then, that you were supposed to stay." "Fate?" "No. Choice. We chose each other, even when we didn't understand why. And we kept choosing each other every day after." Eliza took his hand, squeezed it. "Best choice I ever made." "Even with all the hard parts?" "Especially with all the hard parts. The easy things don't teach you anything." Ethan ran up then, breathless and laughing. "Papa, did you see? I almost caught the big hen." "I saw. You're getting faster. Someday I'll catch her." "Probably, but she's pretty smart." Ethan ran off again, full of energy and life and possibility. Their son. The future they'd built together. Caleb had learned something important over the past years. That grief didn't disappear. Sarah and Samuel would always be part of him, carried in memory and honored in the living. But grief didn't have to be the whole story. There was room for both the past and the present, for loss and for hope. The harshest places in the world didn't break people. Not always. Sometimes they revealed who was strong enough to stay, who was brave enough to build something worth fighting for. And sitting there on the porch of the ranch he'd once used as a hiding place, watching his wife and son in the warm spring sunshine, Caleb knew he'd found both. He'd found someone strong enough to stay. He'd become brave enough to fight for what mattered. And together, they'd built a life that honored the past without being destroyed by it. That was the real transformation. Not forgetting what had been lost, but creating something new alongside it. Not replacing love, but expanding it. Not running from fear, but walking through it to reach what waited on the other side. The land stretched out before them, brown earth preparing for new growth. The garden would bloom soon. Summer would bring heat and hard work. The cycle would continue, as it always did. But now Caleb faced it without the crushing loneliness that had defined his existence before. He had Eliza beside him, Ethan running through the yard, and a future that felt possible instead of threatening. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. They still had hard days, still fought sometimes, still carried scars that would never fully heal. But they had each other. And some days, some beautiful ordinary days like this one, that was more than enough. It was everything.